The message showed up on my phone at 2 in the morning. Congratulations, player number 1. You have completed the game. Do you wish to continue? Yes or no? And because I am, apparently, the exact kind of genius who cannot walk past a yes or no button at 2 a.m., I clicked yes. That's it. That's the entire reason the apocalypse has a landlord now, and the landlord is me. Here's who was dumb enough to press it. I'm Li Wei, broke, skinny, renting a shoebox in High City with a window that looks directly into another window. For a solid year, I'd been playing this survival game that just appeared on my phone one day. No download, no app store. It was called the Wujie Zodiac Trial, and the whole point was to build a shelter, unlock something called a gene lock, raise an army, and survive zombies, bug monsters, and aliens dropping out of the sky. A normal person clears it in 2 months. It took me a year because I kept restarting to make everything perfect, and also, fine, because I'd built a very nice harem in there and leaving felt rude. So I clicked continue. And the game said thank you, and then it reached out of the screen and bit down on my actual life. Ding. Congratulations, host. The trial system is now bound to you. And a glowing panel opened up behind my eyes like a window I couldn't close. Name, Li Wei. Shelter level, none. Strength, 8. Spirit, 9. Stamina, 11. Speed, 7. Little footnote at the bottom, helpful as a knife between the ribs. Average for a normal person is 10. So the universe hands me a system, and the first thing it does is show me a report card proving I'm below average at being a person. Cool. Very cool. Love that. For me. I slapped my own face to check. It hurt. It really genuinely hurt. Not a dream. The panel didn't care that I was having a moment. It just kept talking. Attention, host. The game's apocalypse will arrive in the real world in 1 month. Please prepare accordingly. And that's when I stopped touching my face. Because I'd finished this game. I knew exactly what 1 month from now looked like. A meteor punches the planet. The temperature falls off a cliff and the world freezes solid. Then the dead get up and start walking. Then the bugs come. Then things that are absolutely not from around here come. And at the very end, the Earth itself just stops existing, and the only people still breathing are the ones sitting inside a shelter, flying to a different planet. I know how this movie ends. I've watched it end 100 times. The difference is that this time I'm not holding a controller. I'm inside the screen. System, I said, out loud, in an empty room, like a lunatic. The end of the world, for real. And it said, yes, host. And then, because it apparently believes in customer service, it added, don't panic. You can prepare for anything by building your shelter. That word. Shelter. In the game, a shelter is not a bunker. A shelter is what an alien supercivilization builds when it wants to shrug off a nuke. Level 2 survives a direct nuclear hit and doesn't even scuff the paint. Level 3 ignores every weapon humans have ever invented. And the top of the line, planetary-level, is a fortress half the size of the planet that can pick itself up and fly to another star. I built one of those, once. In the game. It's the reason I got to keep playing after the Earth blew up. Would you like to sign in for the first time? The system asked. Sign in. Obviously. Sign in. Ding. You have obtained a planetary-level shelter building gift pack, and a starter pack, 50 insect cores, and 1 level 1 artificial intelligence. I want to walk you through my emotional journey here, because it was a ride. First feeling, when I saw the words planetary level, was pure ugly joy. I nearly threw my phone through the wall. Second feeling, roughly 1 heartbeat later, when I actually read the label, was the word building, sitting there in the middle of it like a landmine. Building, as in, some assembly required. As in, congratulations on your Galaxy-class fortress. It comes flat-packed. Here's an Allen key. Good luck. I'm 140 pounds soaking wet, and I have never successfully assembled a bookshelf. And the universe wants me to hand-build a 50-story spaceship in 30 days. Before I could finish spiraling, the pack opened itself, and out came the AI, and a face bloomed on my phone screen. Calm, handsome, voice like a butler who has never once been surprised by anything. Hello, sir. I am the star-level shelter artificial intelligence. My name is Alfred. Now, I named him Alfred, in the game. Because I have the imagination of a man who has seen exactly 1 superhero movie and decided that was his whole personality. And I never in 1,000 years expected the game to reach into reality and hand me the butler I made up. But there he was, real. Deep voice, gentle manner, and, as I would learn approximately forever times over the next year, the driest sense of humor ever installed in a machine. Alfred handled everything. Weapons, records, the water, the power, building the robots, running the warehouses. If it plugged into a wall, it was his. And the first thing my brand new god-tier butler did for me was quote me a bill. Because to build a 50-floor shelter in 30 days, I needed workers. Not 200, 2,000 construction robots, running overtime. And each one costs 100 zombie crystals to make. Do the math. 180,000 zombie crystals. And a zombie crystal comes from exactly one place. The inside of a dead zombie's skull. You kill it, you crack it open, you dig one out. So the system was, very politely, asking me to kill 180,000 zombies before the zombies existed, so that I could build the house that would protect me from the zombies. I had 50 insect cores and a stat sheet that said I was a below-average human being. But that's the thing about beating a game 100 times. You know where the loopholes are. I opened the shop. Turns out one insect core trades for 10,000 zombie crystals. So I dumped 20 cores and walked out with 200,000 crystals, kept 30 in my pocket for later, and just like that, I had my seed money. From completely broke to funding a planetary fortress in about 4 seconds. See, the below-average human doesn't win with muscles. He wins because he's read the last page of the book. I took a taxi to the end of the world. 20 kilometers northeast of High City, there's a valley up in the mountains. One road in, wide enough for 3 trucks. Walls of rock on 3 sides, high enough that a tsunami couldn't reach the front door if it tried. In the game, I'd restarted a dozen times just to find a spot this good. In real life, it was sitting there empty, behind a rusted gate with a no trespassing sign and a coil of dead electric wire. Alfred popped the gate for me like it was nothing. And inside, past a stone door that opened with a sound like a mountain clearing its throat, was the most beautiful empty room I have ever seen. A dome overhead that could eat several nukes for breakfast. 50 floors going down into the rock, every single one of them completely, gloriously blank. It was the greatest fortress in the galaxy, and it had the interior design of a parking garage. "Welcome home, sir," Alfred said. "I built the incubators first, summoned my 200 robots, set them building 1,800 more, and stood there like a proud father watching an entire construction crew that never sleeps, never complains, and never asks about lunch. It turns out technology is extremely relaxing when you're the one holding the remote." And then my phone buzzed, because the world hadn't gotten the memo yet. The class group chat. 999 plus messages, most of them about which club to hit that night. Ah, right. I should tell you about Joe Kai. Joe Kai was the assistant class monitor, and his personality was his father's bank account. That night, he'd dropped 60,000 yuan to book the fanciest private room in the city, and he was in the group chat announcing it one adjective at a time while everybody clapped. He'd invited the whole class. He'd very loudly invited Lin Qiang, the prettiest girl in school, who, as usual, hadn't answered. He did not invite me, on purpose. See, once upon a time, Joe Kai tried to confess to a girl, it went badly, and through a chain of events that had nothing to do with me, he decided the whole thing was my fault. So he spent the rest of college quietly turning the class against me, and it wasn't just cold shoulders. He bribed the counselor to tank my final grades. 1 failed final, and you don't graduate. No diploma, 4 years in the trash. The only reason I passed at all was Lin Qiang, the class monitor. She stood up for me when nobody else would. I typed 3 words, "not going," and turned the phone off. Because in 1 month there wasn't going to be a club, or a diploma, or a Joe Kai. There was going to be a meteor, and a cosmic virus, and the dead walking, and one skinny below-average nobody sitting on top of the only fortress in the world that could take a hit. And somewhere across town, Lin Qiang typed her own message into that chat. "Don't go out. Go find a basement. Stock up for months. The apocalypse is coming." The chat laughed at her. I didn't. I was already home. For the next month I built. Alfred quoted me 2,000 construction robots, so I dumped 180,000 crystals into the incubators and let them run around the clock. For money, we simply reached into the accounts of every steel mill and supplier near High City and placed orders the size of small nations. Delivery in 5 days, price no object. Was the money real? Sort of. Would I ever have to pay it back? In 3 weeks there wouldn't be a bank left to ask. So trucks came. 1,000 tons of rice on Monday, 500 tons of frozen pork on Tuesday. Seeds, cloth, forklifts, medicine. By the time we were done, the storehouse could feed 200,000 people for 3 years, and I hadn't lifted anything heavier than my phone. I named the place Kindling Shelter. In the game, that's the whole point of a shelter. When the world burns, you're the ember that survives it. Very poetic. I mostly picked it because it sounded cool. 2 people got a phone call before the sky fell. The first was old He, a retired professor who'd paid my university tuition years back for no reason except that I once returned his forgotten wallet, and he decided that meant something. He called to offer me a spot in his bunker. I told him no, I had a place, but if he ever got in trouble, I'd come running. He laughed and called me stubborn. What I didn't know yet was that old He sat on a small island with a very large secret, and that this stubborn poor kid would one day be the only card he had left to play. The second was Mother Fang. She ran the orphanage that raised me from age 4, and she was, functionally, my mom. Over 100 kids and teachers under her roof. I begged her to come to the shelter. She said no, there were too many of them, they'd manage, and if I ever couldn't hold on, I should come home and she'd feed me, but I'd have to work for it. Then I wired 1,000,000 yuan into her account, and hung up before she could argue. She was one of maybe 3 people in my whole life who'd ever been kind to me for free. What I also didn't know was that Mother Fang was hiding a name a lot older than the orphanage, but that's a card for later. And Jokai? He got on the class group chat and turned the apocalypse into a flex. Photos of his family warehouse, instant noodles stacked to the ceiling, walls of bottled water. He invited the whole class to his daddy's basement, for a fee, and the whole class lined up to thank him. When I said I already had somewhere to stay, and posted one photo of my 100-square-meter room, he squinted at his phone and announced it was obviously photoshopped. And everyone agreed, because a poor orphan can't have a nice room. I typed one last piece of advice into the chat. Avoid the official shelters. Trust no one after the disaster starts. Not your neighbor, not anyone, because you won't know who's been breathing the virus. Then I logged off. They called me cold-blooded and selfish. They said when I came crawling back to beg, they'd remember this. Cool. I'll pencil it in. Then it was New Year's Eve, and I was eating lobster and abalone in front of a wall-sized screen, watching the official countdown hit 0. 2 mountains fell out of the sky. They cracked into the Pacific and woke up a volcano on the seafloor. A tsunami tall as a building erased whole coastal cities in minutes. The crust shrugged, and earthquakes cracked open every country at once. Buildings folded, the ground split into bottomless mouths and swallowed cars, houses, people. Volcanoes went up everywhere at once, and threw so much ash into the sky that the whole planet just dimmed. The sun switched off, and me, sitting inside a fortress built to laugh at nuclear weapons, felt the floor shake under my feet. That's how hard the world got hit. The nuke-proof box trembled. Half an hour later it went quiet, and Alfred put the surveillance feeds up on the wall. 70% dead along the coasts, 90% inland. Power gone, water gone, internet gone. People clawing through rubble for family that wasn't answering. And I sat there in a warm room full of lobster, and watched a species get its lease cancelled. But the meteors were just the delivery truck. The real cargo was in the air. A cosmic virus, burned off the rock as it fell, riding the wind into every lung on Earth. Alfred pulled up a feed from the country nearest the impact, and I watched the first one turn. Pale eyes, stiff limbs. It lunged at a neck, and within 1 minute the whole frame was people eating people. I'd killed 10,000 of these things in the game without blinking. Turns out a screen is very generous about what it doesn't show you. I nearly lost the lobster. So I got up. Because the fortress was full, and the world was empty, and I had about 3.5 hours of daylight, and zombies get braver after dark. I loaded 550 robots onto trucks and buses, armed to the teeth, and sent them into downtown High City with one rule. Save who you can, be home before sunset. And they were beautiful. A shot, a dropped zombie, a support robot hopping out to crack the skull and toss the crystal in the truck, because even during a rescue, Daddy does not leave money on the ground. Survivors swarmed them like moths. We pulled over 1,000 people off those streets in an hour. And here's the thing nobody warns you about at the end of the world. It's not the zombies that make you tired, it's the people you save, because the second they were safe in the truck, breathing my exhaust instead of dying in the street, they started managing me. A man in an expensive suit stood up and informed my robots that they should prioritize his safety over the rescue. Someone else threatened to file a complaint. A bank manager offered to pay for a better seat. We'd been alive in the apocalypse for 1 hour, and there was already a customer asking to speak to a manager. One of my robots went up into a half-collapsed building for a single old woman in a wheelchair, blood down her face, and the whole busload groaned that she wasn't worth the stop. Her name doesn't matter yet. What matters is that she had a daughter volunteering at a kindergarten across the street, a girl named Shu Min, with, in her words, special circumstances. Remember that name. She's going to save the entire planet with a chemistry set, and she doesn't know it yet. I told the truck to drive to the kindergarten. The busload of rescued strangers hated me for it, and I remember thinking, very clearly, from inside my warm command room full of lobster, this is going to be the whole rest of my life, isn't it? Saving people who are furious about how I do it. Spoiler. It was. The suit man on the bus wouldn't let it go. Kept demanding we drop the rescue and drive the elites to safety first. Kept threatening to file complaints. Kept working the crowd until 2/3 of the bus was chanting with him. So my squad leader gave him exactly what he asked for. Minority obeys the majority, he said, and stopped the bus, and threw everyone who'd voted against the rescue out the door, into the open street, at dusk. And when the suit man screamed that this wasn't a safe place, the squad leader explained the math. If I throw you off, then the people still on the bus become the majority, and the majority wants to keep going. So technically I kept my promise. Have a nice walk. We picked up the orphanage after that. Kids in a corner, teachers swinging brooms at a door about to fold, a squad of exhausted soldiers from an actual earthquake relief team holding the line with the last of their bullets. 3 minutes of my firepower, and the door was clean. Shumin found her mother alive on the bus and cried into her wheelchair. And the soldiers wouldn't come with us, they still had a mission. So my squad leader handed them guns, grenades, and a map to the shelter, and they bowed to each other in the middle of the apocalypse, like two men who'd remembered what people used to be. That one I liked. On the way home, we passed the last intersection. And there, in a second-floor window, was the suit man, bitten all over, holding a zombie's head in one hand, watching his one bus in the whole world drive past him and not stop. He'd had a seat, and he stood up out of it to be right. Last thing he sobbed was that he was a rural orphan who'd clawed his way to a manager's salary and hadn't reached the top yet. Buddy, neither had I. The difference is I didn't spend my last hour trying to get someone thrown off a bus. Here's the part nobody outside the shelter understood, and honestly, it's the whole trick. I didn't run my fortress on fear. I ran it on breakfast. Everybody who joined got a wristband and a job. Cook, farm, fix engines, raise pigs, whatever your one useful skill was. You worked, you earned points, and points bought a bed, a shower, and a cafeteria, where a fresh steamed bun cost you 1 point and a plate of garlic lobster cost 50. The lowest worker cleared 3,600 points a month. Rent and 3 meals ran maybe 2,300. So a man who'd been laughed out of his village for a useless animal husbandry degree suddenly had a warm room, hot food, spare points, and a line of piglets that needed him. You want to know why nobody stormed the gates of the guy sitting on all the guns? Because I'd turned survival into a job with benefits, and a frog in warm water does not leap. It orders the lobster, and the one guy who wouldn't get in the water, I boiled in front of everyone. His name was Wang Hao. Foreign PhD, walked in demanding a private lab, room service, sole access to the research floor, and, cherry on top, control of my AI. Sure, I said, show me your file. And Alfred, in that lovely butler voice, read it out to the whole room. The national top exam score he bragged about? Stolen. It belonged to a poor kid from his village, and Wang Hao's father, the town mayor, had swapped the names. The degree? Bought. The awards? Bought. And Wang Hao panicked and blurted out, but my dad kept it so secret. How could you? Which in front of 200 witnesses is what we in the business call a full confession. So I granted almost every demand. Private room, meals delivered, sole access, total solitude. On floor 47. Babysitting the nuclear reactors, where ordinary people cannot stay for long without their insides quietly cooking. Don't worry, I told him. Alfred will teach you anything you don't know. He wet himself on the way to the elevator. Cruel? Maybe. But everyone in that room learned the same 2 lessons in the same 5 minutes. The soft one, work, and this place will feed you better than the world ever did. The hard one, try to take it, and I will smile the whole time I hand you your reward. You need both hands to run heaven. The sugar and the reactor. Then I got to work on the actual future. I gave Shumin the research floor, 1,000 crystals, and one job that mattered more than she knew. Study the zombies. And build me an evolution fluid, something to unlock the gene lock in a normal human body. Because I remembered how this game went. In a week, the first zombie horde was coming. A wave. In the game I died in that wave more times than I could count, and the game let me restart. Real life doesn't have a load screen. So the below-average human, with the god-tier fortress, went back out into the ruins day after day, hauling home 2,000 terrified, furious, ungrateful survivors at a time, and quietly counted down to the first night the dead came in a flood. 6 days, and I spent them building a business. First I burned 10,000 crystals to raise a signal tower, and suddenly Alfred had the whole internet again, which for an all-seeing AI is less like giving him glasses and more like giving him hands. He went online and immediately warned the residents not to visit adult websites because, and I quote, "If you do, my account will be banned." My god-tier butler was worried about his own reputation. I let it go. Then I opened a forum, posted a free guide to killing zombies. Bad eyesight, sharp hearing, crack the skull, dig out the crystal. Half the internet called it fake, until one big guy filmed himself caving in a zombie's head with a shovel and holding up the crystal, and then the whole world went hunting. And that's when I posted the second thing. Kindling Shelter buys crystals. 1 crystal, a hot meal. 3 crystals, a loaded pistol. 5, a grenade. The comments were a tidal wave of the exact same complaint. If you're this rich, why not just give it away for free? And I want you to understand the beautiful machine I'd just switched on, because those angry commenters were the fuel. Every zombie in the city was now worth money to a starving stranger, so the whole population went out and did my crystal farming for me, for free, and paid me in the one currency that upgrades my fortress. And yes, I was arming rival warlords with those pistols, on purpose. Because a man who is not afraid of you buying a gun is telling you something about how badly the gun is going to work against him. I sold the whole city its weapons and slept fine. Naturally, someone tried to break the machine on day 1. An old woman shoved to the front of the exchange line, threw down cash, and screamed that refusing money was against the law. My robot said we only take crystals. So she lay down on the ground and started wailing about her poor starving grandchildren, and the crowd, being human, took her side and threatened to boycott the whole stall unless we handed her free food. Classic. Weaponized pity. So I made a decision from my warm command room. Close the stall. If nobody wants to trade unless it's free, then nobody trades. Go home. Come back tomorrow. Sweet dreams. And I shut the doors while the aroma of hot food drifted through the fence at a crowd that had just talked itself out of dinner over a stranger's performance. They rioted, obviously. A robot fired into some thighs to make the point, then reminded everyone that screaming attracts zombies at night, and the screaming stopped very fast. The old woman, she walked off cursing, food free, having cost 40 people their supper to prove a point that helped no one. There's a version of that woman in every apocalypse. Do not feed her. Meanwhile, across town, Joe Kai's Grand Basement Paradise was serving its guests one square of black bread and a thimble of water. While he sat in his father's room, where the buns and tea eggs were, he'd figured out I might not be dead. He'd seen a photo of me loading up a cafeteria tray and gone very quiet. And behind those narrowed eyes, the boy who'd bribed a counselor to fail me was already doing the same math on my fortress that 100 other little warlords were doing. How do I take that? File him under later. He's going to earn it. The person I actually cared about that week walked up to my exchange stall, covered in dried blood with 5 crystals and 2 hungry kids at home. 2 meters tall. Built like a door. 10 years in the army. Took first place in the Rabbit Eagle military games. The kind of man they call a king of soldiers. My robot practically begged him to come join us. He said maybe. Grabbed his food and left to feed his daughters, Xiao Yu and Xiao Shi. Remember them too. In a while, one of them is going to pilot a war machine the size of a building. He didn't make it home clean. Because the blackmail auntie from the stall had a family, 5 grown men living in a tent at the foot of the mountain, and every one of them would rather starve than touch a zombie. Her college graduate son had a whole legal philosophy for it. When your life is threatened and the law can't help you, your last option is to commit a crime. Beautiful. 4 years of education, and the takeaway was mugging a soldier. So they staked out his container, the auntie faked a broken leg at his door to draw him out and beg painkillers, and the retired king of soldiers, because soldiers serve the people is welded into a man like that, actually sighed and went back for the medicine. And while he was crouched over the crying old woman being decent, her sons crept into his container and grabbed his 2 little girls by the hair. Xiao Yu, Xiao Shi, sticks against their necks. The big man turned around, and every muscle in that 2-meter body went still and terrible. And I think you can already guess how the college graduate's legal theory was about to work out. It didn't get the chance to, because that's when the zombies showed up. A few hundred of them, coming out of the dark toward my mountain, and Alfred pinged me mid-yawn. So I loaded 6 trucks and drove the whole battle a kilometer downhill from the door, and Ma Lei, the big man, stood behind a tree and watched my robots work. Grenades into the packed highway. Then headshots, 1 bullet each, at night, by moonlight. Not a round wasted. Half an hour, start to finish, and they even dug the crystals and burned the corpses before they left. He'd been a king of soldiers, taken first place against the whole world, and he stood there doing the math and couldn't make it come out. Nobody trained troops like that. The next morning he walked up to my recruitment stall and signed on, 2 daughters in tow, Xiao Yu and Xiao Shi, and Kindling Shelter got its first real soldier. The blackmail auntie got a different ending. Running from the horde, she fell, and the little brother she'd spoiled her whole life, the one she'd sworn to their parents she'd protect forever, tore his hand out of hers and ran, muttering that he had to carry on the family line. She sat down in the road and let it happen. Her husband broke the brother's nose over it. I didn't feel much. The apocalypse doesn't invent people like that. It just turns the lights on. By then, the rich were coming to shop. 5 private shelter bosses rolled up in armored convoys, plus a neighborhood committee secretary named Kai Wen, who took one look at how young I was and decided to teach me morality. Do I know how many people are starving out there? Do I know what real virtue is? Would I please open my warehouses and hand everything out for free? And, oh, she'd be glad to send her people in to help me run the operation. Right, she wanted my fortress and dressed it up as charity. So I told her, if you actually cared, you'd buy my food and hand it out yourself. You just want the halo for free. Sit down. The clown act is a nice change of pace, but everyone here is busy. The whole room laughed at her. She sat down. She stayed sat down. The one who mattered was a viper in a suit named Gu Chuan, young master of the Lin family, who'd done his homework. He knew about the orphanage in Qing City that raised me. He knew Mother Fang was there, and he strolled up smiling and offered me a deal. His family would protect that orphanage, and in exchange I'd hand over 1/10 of everything I owned. A tenth. And if I said no, well, orphanages are so fragile these days. He'd found the one lever he thought could move me, and he leaned on it in front of witnesses. He was right that it was a lever. He was catastrophically wrong about which direction it moved, because the fastest way to make the below-average human stop smiling is to point at the people who raised him and say, nice orphanage, shame if something happened. I let the fury show for exactly 1 second. Then I had my robots take him. Not kill him, keep him. Because a dead hostage protects nothing, but a live Lin heir in my basement makes the entire Lin family extremely invested in that orphanage's continued good health. He screamed about how untouchable he was the whole way to the cells. And with their young master gone and the roads between cities crawling with zombies, his little empire back in High City was going to eat itself alive without him, which, frankly, was now his problem. Then I turned the fury off like a tap, smiled, and invited everyone to lunch, because the other 4 bosses still had shopping to do and I am, above all, a businessman. They gaped at the cafeteria. 30 dishes, clean clothes, people jogging in shorts underground while the world froze outside. Eden with a keycard. And when they realized they hadn't brought nearly enough crystals to buy the guns and food they needed, I offered them the last hook. A loan. 5,000 crystals each. 2 months, 5%. Go kill zombies. Pay me back with interest. And they signed, thrilled, every one of them, not one of them noticing that I had just put the entire warlord economy of the region on my payment plan. They thought they were buying weapons. They were opening store credit at the end of the world. I own you now. Enjoy the lobster. Now I needed hands. So I opened a guard team, 6,000 slots, and half my Eden lined up to sign, because a man will run into hell for the people who feed his kids. Ma Lei, my new king of soldiers, took one look at the robot drill instructor and challenged him to a fight for command of the whole thing. The robot caught his best punch in one open hand, let him swing for 5 minutes, then dropped him with a single tap. Ma Lei woke up in his own bed, lied to his daughters that training was just tough, and quietly rebuilt his entire understanding of the world. Then he went out and started killing 10 zombies in 10 seconds, because that's what you do when you finally understand the ceiling is higher than you thought. Break a man's pride once, cleanly, and he stops trying to be the strongest and starts trying to be useful. That's the whole trick of running an army of people who used to be somebody. And I needed the army fast, because Xu Min had found a number on her instruments climbing toward a cliff, and I already knew what waited at the top. A blood moon. One night, soon, when the tide of the world would peak and turn every zombie in the city bloodthirsty and berserk all at once. Hundreds of thousands of them, in one night. That's the wave I died on, over and over, back when the game let me try again. There was a nastier wrinkle too. My scouts kept filming zombie herds that walked in formation, didn't eat, didn't scatter, just calmly rounded up living people and drove them off somewhere, like sheepdogs. That's a lord zombie, a mutant smart enough to command the horde and fatten itself on whatever they capture. Which is terrifying, except for one gorgeous weakness. The lord is only as tough as a normal corpse. One clean headshot, and every zombie it's puppeteering drops dead in the same instant. 100,000 zombies, 1 bullet, if you can reach the puppeteer. So the question of the whole apocalypse became very simple. Can I get to him before he gets to me? While I was chewing on that, the day handed me a gift. Near a looted food street, an old man in mud was hiding out with a young student he called An Ling. And the old man had watched a zombie herd move for exactly 10 seconds and deduced the invisible puppeteer behind it, out loud, from first principles. A crew of survivors he'd saved repaid him by promising to bring supplies and then sneaking off to my shelter without him, leaving the burden behind. Except the burden had already borrowed one of their phones, quietly filed a joint application to Kindling Shelter for himself and his student, and gotten it approved. He didn't want to see photos of a wife and kids. He doesn't have any. He wanted the internet for 10 seconds to outplay the people who abandoned him. His name was Professor Chen Bo, and it turned out he was Xu Min's own teacher, which meant the man who could crack the gene lock had just walked into my map. When she heard, she nearly took my head off telling me to go get him, so I went. And on the road to the food street I met the other people hunting the professor. A convoy of armored trucks full of foreign mercenaries, a slaver crew that raided the ruins for captives and talent to haul back and sell, and they'd already scooped up the ingrates who ditched the old man, and they'd worked out from those idiots bragging that the professor was worth grabbing too. 2 convoys, 1 narrow intersection, city center crawling with corpses, and both captains counting each other's guns. Nobody wants a firefight loud enough to ring the dinner bell for every zombie in a mile. We turned in at the same second. And the second the wheels turned, both of us gave the same order at the same time. Fire. It wasn't close. My robots were out of the trucks, in cover, and firing before the mercenaries got a door open. A grenade flipped the lead truck onto its side. Then 100 robots crossed 20 meters of open street through the smoke, and inside 4 minutes, a crew of hand-picked international kings of soldiers had been reduced to a few captured squad leaders shouting that it was impossible in 3 different languages. Their white captain crawled out of the wreck, saw his whole team dead on the ground, and stopped believing in reality. I let him keep a little breath and a lot of fear, because a live prisoner talks and a dead one doesn't. He promised me his headquarters would send something worse next time. I filed that too. He wasn't wrong. Then I collected my prize. Professor Chen, out of the mud, eyes bright, and the moment we were on the bus he tested me right back. Asked if I'd stay if he said he wanted to go home. The whole cabin went cold. Guns drifted his way, and the old man looked me dead in the eye and asked the real question. Whose side are you on? China's, your own, or your ambitions? And I told him the truth. None of the three. I stand on the future. He thought about that for a long moment, then stood and shook my hand, and just like that, the man who could crack the gene lock was mine, and Shu Min nearly cried when her teacher and little sister walked into her lab. The apocalypse didn't give me time to enjoy it. Ma Lei's regiment, out on its first solo mission, had walked into that Lord Zombie's herd and gotten swallowed. Because this Lord wasn't some fresh corpse. It was second order, and it had a whole zoo of first-order mutants under it. Steel-skinned ones that shrugged off machine guns, giant mod ones, crawlers faster than a man. So I turned my convoy around and cut Ma Lei a road out with grenades and concentrated fire, killing every frontline mutant I could reach, because everyone that dies is strength peeled off the puppeteer. We got them out. We did not get the Lord. It roared once, from somewhere I couldn't see, and every corpse in the district went berserk at the sound, and I knew right then that this thing was going to be a problem with a face someday. I logged the coordinates and ran. I came home to a crowd blocking my own front gate. Furious that I'd cut back the exchange rate before the storm, chanting that even the Emperor couldn't move them. Then my armored buses rolled up out of the dark, submachine guns already out the windows, and the Emperor's untouchable crowd remembered very suddenly that they had somewhere else to be. Professor Chen watched them scatter and asked, quietly, whether I'd really shoot survivors. Only in the legs, I said. He looked relieved for exactly 1 second, until I added that in the apocalypse, taking a man's legs is taking his life, and I'd do it anyway, because there is no order without rules and no rules that bend for a mob. He didn't argue. We just lived different lives, and both of us knew it. Because the real thing was coming. 2 days out. I finally put it on the forum in plain words. A blood moon is rising, and when it does, every zombie in the city goes berserk for 1 entire night. Get underground, lock your doors, don't come out till morning. Then I burned almost every crystal I had left, nearly 200,000 of them, and lit 5 new production lines. Drones, fighter jets, heavy weapons. 2 million rounds, 2 submachine guns, and a pistol for every soldier, armored cars, rocket launchers. If terror is just insufficient firepower, then I was going to be the least terrified man alive. Across town, Zhou Kai's little kingdom was falling apart on its own. His fair-weather classmates, hungry on black bread, had figured out that the poor orphan they'd all agreed to spit on was eating like a king in the only paradise left, and they turned on Zhou Kai the exact instant he stopped being useful, the same way they'd turned on me. His father beat him with a belt for having wasted the one classmate worth keeping, and every one of them sat there filling out my recruitment form with dead eyes, praying to be led into the Eden they'd mocked me for having. I didn't gloat. I just noticed. The apocalypse is a very honest accountant. One last thing from those 2 days, and it's the thread that runs under this whole story. My people interrogated the captured mercenaries. I'll spare you what that room looked like, because the answer we pulled out of it mattered more than the method. These weren't soldiers of any country. They were disposable muscle for an organization with no name, and every one of them had been hired, moved, and commanded by a single Chinese man. A soft, smiling pharmacy manager named Feng Yan. Ordinary background, ordinary face, ordinary life, and somehow he owned half a dozen properties, half a dozen names, and gave orders to foreign kill teams with no phone, no signal, no message anyone could trace. The zombies were the disaster everyone could see. Feng Yan was the one I couldn't. And a smiling man who commands armies out of thin air is a much older, much worse problem than the Walking Dead. I told Alfred to watch him. Every move. I just didn't know yet what he was the front door to. Then the moon turned red. When the tide peaked, a 2-meter mutant somewhere in the dead city looked up at the blood moon and howled, and every zombie in High City stood up at once with red in their eyes. And then they did something that made my blood go cold. They didn't fan out to hunt the survivors and the other shelters. The entire city's dead, every single one, turned and marched at me. Somebody was aiming them. And walking calmly alongside that river of corpses, untouched, came a column of armored trucks, 10 attack helicopters overhead, and the rival warlords I'd sold guns to on credit, here to spend my own weapons on my walls. The Netherwolf mercenary crew was running the show, and they had a leash on the Lord Zombie itself, a small, thin something, locked in a cage in their lead truck, with 2 blood-red eyes looking out. So I fought the way I'd learned to fight in 1,000 replays. 3 defense lines down the mountain road, thousands of soldiers each, mines and buried charges everywhere, 2 gunships in the air. The first line held, bled, and fell back under the helicopter's cover. The second line took over. And that's where it got expensive. The Lord Zombie was smart, second-order smart. It sent steel-skinned mutants first to soak the fire, and hid its fast claw mutants inside their bodies, so that when the steel ones finally burned through my wall of flame, the claws burst out the other side at full speed, and hit my line before anyone understood what had happened. That's how I lost Zhang Zhongsheng, a captain, a man with jokes and a family. A claw took him from behind, and with the last second he had, he pulled a grenade and told his men to run, and took the thing with him. He didn't get a body to bury. His friend carried a piece of his leg off the field so there'd be something under the marker. That's what the blood moon cost, and I want it on the record, because everything after this was paid for with men like him. But smart works both ways. I'd hollowed out the whole road between the first line and the highway, left just a shell of earth over an empty trench, and packed it. And when the horde and the traitor convoy were all standing on it, I set it off. The ground fell out from under a river of zombies and a column of trucks at once, dropped them 5 meters into a pit, and then 2 gunships poured fire into the hole until it burned like a furnace. The warlords who'd taken my loans, who'd promised to guard my flank and then sold me to foreigners, went into that pit clutching the guns I'd sold them. One wrong step leads to another. I just built them a very literal one. Their leash slipped too. Whatever they'd caged to control the Lord Zombie got out during the chaos, and one of my robots on the third line caught a small figure running out of the dark. A child, near enough. White as paper, not a drop of blood in it. Red eyes, red hair, teeth like needles. A zombie, Alfred said, and starving, and unlike anything either of us had a name for, it didn't attack. It just ran to my line and got scooped up, snarling, and stood there in a robot's grip while the war went on around it. I filed that one under later too. I had no idea I was holding a thread that would eventually walk me straight to a wife and a daughter. That night it was just the strangest thing on a battlefield full of strange things. Then I dealt with the helicopters. Because while everyone thought this was a firepower duel, 10 of theirs against 2 of mine, Alfred had quietly walked into their aircraft the way he walks into everything with a network cable. I hung my little suicide drones in the clouds around their whole formation, let them waste a rocket that my drones ate in midair, and then I got on their own radio so the last thing the smug ones would hear was me. There's no misunderstanding, I told them. You're just the opening act. And I lit the drones. 10 attack helicopters became one mushroom cloud over the highway, a blast so hard it rocked my own gunships and blew wind across the last defense line, and their commander on the ground stood there screaming into a dead radio, unable to do the math on how a slightly stronger Shelter had just deleted his air force in one breath. And here's the part I enjoyed, because retention comes from witnesses. The whole time, those mercenaries had been live streaming my death to the entire city. Every survivor with a signal had been watching, cheering for Kindling Shelter to fall, promising to spit on my ruins. So when their broadcast cut out in that explosion and flickered back, the man on camera wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine. A guy in black-rimmed glasses, the one who'd been quietly winning the food photo wars on my forum for days, grinning into the lens. Hello everyone, welcome to Kindling Shelter's first live stream. Please remember to like and leave a 5-star review. He introduced himself as Wu Jie, mentioned that Netherwolf's 10 combat helicopters had been destroyed on account of their weak combat power, and then swung the camera down to show a whole city the truth. My third line, thousands of soldiers, not one of them out of place, feeding, firing, throwing, calling, in perfect order under a reign of the dead, tighter than any real army those viewers had ever seen. The mockery in the comments died in real time. And then Wu Jie got a new instruction in his earpiece, smiled, and told his brand new audience to grab popcorn, because the next segment was going to be the ingrates who bought my guns and turned them on me, and the feature presentation was artillery. The whole city watched me win. That, it turns out, is worth more than the winning. Wu Jie ran a live poll. Revenge, type 1. Mercy, type 2. Then he turned off the comments the instant the bleeding heart votes came in, gave the city 5 seconds, and swung the camera down onto the traitor convoy in the pit. 20 minutes of gunships. When the smoke cleared, there was no blood and no bodies, just craters and fire, and the certainty that nobody walked out of that. The warlords who'd taken my loans and sold me to foreigners got erased on camera in front of the entire audience they'd gathered to watch me die. I don't recommend borrowing from a man and then shooting at him. The interest is steep. The Lord Zombie was the one that stuck with me. When the mercenaries realized they'd lost, their sniper put a bullet through the strange child creature they'd used as their leash, hoping the loss would send the puppeteer berserk enough to crush me on the way down. And the roar that came out of the dark then wasn't a monster's, it was grief. My scouts finally found the thing that had been driving a whole city's dead at me. And it was a woman. 2 meters tall, waist-length hair, weeping red tears, howling at my walls over a dead child. That was the first time it really landed for me that some of these things wearing corpses still had a person somewhere inside, screaming. I filed that away hardest of all. But grief or not, she'd brought 1,000,000 dead to my door, so I dropped the trump cards I'd been saving, napalm and cluster bombs built from my last crystals, off the belly of a transport helicopter, and I burned the puppeteer down. By sunrise the roaring stopped, and a whole city of the dead just lay down. Because when the Lord dies, the strings cut. Then came the harvest. 1.5 million crystals from one night. 500 first tier, 100 second, 1 third tier, and 1 strange special one. That's not a body count, that's a fortune. That's every upgrade my fortress had been starving for, delivered in a single night by an enemy who thought he was burying me. 5,326 of my 6,000 came home. Male reported the number himself, standing in front of men soaked in blood, one of them still carrying a piece of a dead captain, so there'd be something to bury. And I didn't give a speech. I walked into the middle of my cafeteria, told them thank you for being willing to die, and drank an entire case of liquor bottle by bottle in front of the whole guard team, because some thank yous you say with your liver. They drank all day. I gave them 2 days off. It was the closest thing to a family that any of us had left. And then, because the apocalypse had eaten our new year, I threw it again. The Lantern Festival was coming, so I told my people we'd celebrate the spring festival we never got. Within a day, the whole underground fortress went red with couplets and lanterns. Residents built their own carnival games. The chefs of High City had a genuine argument about dumplings versus rice balls and settled it by making all of it. I spent 100 points on fireworks over the valley so there'd be something to look up at. And on the night of the festival, with the cafeteria roaring and the fireworks going, Wu Jie pointed his camera at the feast and streamed it to a starving city. Not to gloat, exactly, but so every survivor freezing out there could see with their own eyes that somewhere in the ruins, a place still existed where people ate and drank and laughed like the world hadn't ended. That's the recruiting poster. That's the whole pitch. Come inside, and you get to be a person again. That was the night I first really noticed Male's 2 daughters, the sharp one and the shy one, laughing at a carnival shooting stall. Xiao Yu and Xiao Shi. I mention it because in a while, one of them ends up behind the controls of something 150 meters tall. But that night they were just 2 kids who'd survived, playing a game in the only warm room left in the world. And I'd built it, the below-average human, out of a game he clicked continue on at 2 in the morning. Turns out that was a more literal sentence than I knew. But first, I had a funeral to throw. I built a wall in the valley and carved every dead soldier's name into it, a hall of fame. Families knelt and wept in front of it, and the whole shelter watched. And then I told my captains that a proper funeral needs offerings, and the offerings would be the warlords who'd sold me to foreigners. Chen, Wang, Zhang, the 3 family heads who'd survived the pit because they were too important to come themselves. My men hesitated, because these were living people. So I made them picture it, plainly, what happens to your wives, your kids, your parents, the night these men succeed and get inside these walls. That's all it took. We split into 3 groups, gunships and all, and inside 1 hour, those 3 families ceased to exist. Not a survivor. The order was, don't leave so much as an earthworm. I meant it. Because in this world you crush a threat down to the root, or it grows back wearing your family's blood. The whole city watched that on the stream too, and every little warlord left in High City quietly crossed Kindling Shelter off their list of things to try. Somebody was watching from higher up than that. On an island far away, an old man with a granddaughter and a telegraph machine had been tracking the fortress that appeared in High City out of nowhere. He decided not to recruit me, not yet. Said I was still too weak to survive what was really coming. And then he tapped out one order to everyone under him. Do not disturb Kindling Shelter. I didn't know his name yet. He was the ceiling above my whole world, and he'd just decided to let me grow. And then, the morning after the funeral, my sign-in came back to life, and it changed everything I thought I understood. Congratulations, it said. You have completed the beginner trial of the Wu Jie trial, rating S, and outpoured the rewards, 5 million evolution points, the gene lock, unlocked, mine to activate, and my stat panel, which used to read a sad little 8, 9, 11, 7, exploded. I dumped the points in, and rode my strength up past 1,000, cracked the first gene lock, then the second, and stood in my kitchen feeling like I could punch through the mountain. I crushed a coffee cup just by picking it up, but it was that one word that stopped me cold. Trial. The beginner trial. Of a game. Which meant maybe this was never the real apocalypse leaking into my life. Maybe I never left the game at all. Maybe I clicked continue at 2 in the morning and I'm still in there. And everything, the shelter, the soldiers, the dead men on my wall, is just data waiting to be wiped when the game ends. For the first time since this started, I sat down in my own garden and couldn't move. Because what is the point of any of it if a reset button erases the whole world the second I win? It was the old professor who talked me off that ledge. He sat down next to me and asked if it really mattered whether the save file got wiped. And when I said of course it matters, everything I've built turns to garbage data, he smiled and asked me why anyone buys a house they'll die and leave behind. Why an athlete chases a trophy that tarnishes. Why we do any of it. It's the process, he said, not the ending. The ending is always the same, game or life, everyone dies, every save gets closed. What you get to keep is the being there. And, he added, tapping his own bad back, I can feel my herniated disc and my frozen shoulder and my heart beating, and none of that has ever felt like data to me. Even if it's a game, Li Wei, you're still you. You're the one irreplaceable character in it, so play. I sat there a while longer. Then I laughed, because he was right, and because being right had just handed me back my whole world. Game or real, I command a planetary fortress and tens of thousands of people and a second gene lock, and that's mine to enjoy for as long as the level lasts. I owe you one, Professor. Good thing too, because his students had just handed me the master key. Shu Min and Professor Chen cracked the crystal. Vaporize it, breathe it, and enough of it rewrites an ordinary human's genes and unlocks their gene lock. The same power that makes my combat robots monsters. Which meant I could turn my entire population from refugees into something that fights back. Human trials started immediately. And that same day, a lottery draw handed me the last two things I'd need for the war I could feel coming. A factory that builds war machines tens of meters tall, and a device that takes a dead Lord zombie and brings the person inside it back, in a new body, with every memory intact and total loyalty. I looked at the 1/3 tier crystal I'd pulled off the grieving puppeteer from the Blood Moon, the one who'd howled over a dead child, and I fed it into the machine and set it running. 48 hours. I told myself I was building a weapon. What I was actually doing, though I had no idea yet, was building the woman I'd marry. While that cooked, I spent everything I had. 2 enormous new arsenals opened up beside the fortress, each one a pit deep enough to build and repair war machines tens of meters tall, the kind of thing a person only builds when they know something the size of a mountain is coming. And I knew exactly what was coming, because I'd played it. 2 months out, the cold. The whole planet freezing to 50 below. 3 months after that, the Zerg, pouring out of a rift in the sea. So I geared my best personal guards up like walking tanks, plasma blades and nano armor and shoulder cannons, and I made a decision about the city around me. High City was going to be mine, all of it. I called in the 2 rival bosses who were left, the building shelter director and Joe Kai's father, and I gave them exactly 2 doors: submit or leave High City forever. They hated it, but they'd both seen what I did to the 3 families who chose wrong, so they submitted. I let them keep their little kingdoms and their titles. They just take my orders now, 100%, and I feed them weapons so that when the real horror comes, their shelters are the outer wall and mine is the keep. That's not mercy, that's building a moat out of other people. But the lesson that actually mattered that week, the one that hardened this whole place into what it needed to be, came from my own soldiers, and it cost lives to teach. A rescue truck was out doing its last run of the day with 2 of my personal guards aboard, and a group of bandits ran the oldest con in the apocalypse. They played helpless. Weeping grandmothers, sick old men, hungry children by the roadside, all begging to be saved. My personal guards said drive past, it's a trap. But the young guard team on that truck were still soft, still carrying peacetime hearts, and they'd spent all day watching real suffering, and they decided their captain was cruel, and they knew better. So they disobeyed a direct order and loaded the decoys aboard. Kind kids, good kids. And the helpless old men had guns and grenades stitched into a body they'd hollowed out as a smuggling case, and at the city gate the ambush closed, and my soldiers started dying, one shot in the head reaching out of a truck window, another executed while the boys stood frozen, holding the very people they'd stopped to save. And the whole time the bandits laughed and explained the joke to them. You think you're saviors, you're children playing hero with another man's food and another man's fortress, and out here, the only person you can save is yourself. My personal guards let it run, on purpose. Because some lessons only land in blood, and then, when the point had been made, they turned it off like a switch, dodged the bullets, and erased every bandit in about the time it takes to describe it. One thin guard team kid, the only one who'd stayed cynical and refused to get off the truck, got a commendation. The rest got driven home in silence. I broadcast the whole thing to the shelter. Every resident watched what the outside had become, watched good men die of their own kindness, and the mood in my Eden changed for good. And then I did the hard thing. The thing that makes people call me a monster. I gathered that guard team in the valley, and I asked them 5 questions. Who gave you the authority to override my orders? Who gave you the right to leak my fortress's secrets to strangers? Who gave you the right to spend my resources on your own conscience? Who told you the plan I built to keep 10,000 people alive was wrong? And who is going to answer for the professional I lost and the truckload that nearly died? And then I expelled them, all of them, families included, out the gate by noon. Malay stepped up to beg for them. They're just kids. And I looked at my own king of soldiers and asked him one question back. What if the door those kids opened had let in a bomb that killed Xiao Yu? He went gray and stopped talking, because that's a father's whole world in one sentence, and he knew I was right. Their families rioted, refused to leave, screamed that taking them in made me responsible for them forever. It ended the way those things end, when someone won't move and the rules can't bend. Cruel. I know it was cruel. But I run a fortress on a simple, ugly truth that the whole soft world spent a lifetime pretending wasn't real. Your kindness is a door, and at the end of the world, everything that wants to eat you comes through doors. I would rather be hated and have my people alive than beloved and burying them. So I keep the door, and I keep the key, and I sleep fine. Mostly. The bandits, by the way, had a return address. Alfred traced them to the Linz Merchant Guild, so I sent gunships and turned it into a crater, and the 7 remaining shelters in High City got the message and lined up to submit the next morning. I fed them lunch first, one of my favorite little cruelties, sat them in front of steaming plates and watched them not dare to eat, then told them plainly, from now on High City has one voice, and it's mine. Obey, or leave, or die. They all chose obey. High City was a fief now. Mine. And then I went downstairs to meet the weapon I'd been growing. The conversion machine chimed, the pod hissed open, and inside was not a monster, it was a woman. Black hair to her waist, and the moment she opened her eyes she remembered everything, including me. Including that I was the one who'd burned her down on the blood moon. The grieving Lord Zombie, made human again, with her memory intact and her hate fully loaded. She got a hand around my throat before I could blink, and only the fact that I'd cracked my second gene lock let me break the grip. Because the conversion binds her body to my commands, not her mind. Her mind was free to hate me all it wanted, and it did. She told me the truth of what she was, and it rewrote the whole war for me. Her name was Han Yue, an orphan, a college kid, kidnapped a full year ago, months before the meteor, by an organization called God's Descent. She was the only human out of nearly 100,000 test subjects who adapted to their virus instead of turning into a mindless corpse. So they made her their prize Lord Zombie, and when she finally escaped in the chaos of the meteor strike, all she wanted was to disappear somewhere quiet and raise the little girl she'd adopted, a child the same experiments had changed. And then the mercenaries stole that child to use as a leash and drove her at my walls, and I killed her over a daughter I didn't even know she was mourning. When she said all that, the whole apocalypse tilted. The virus wasn't random cosmic bad luck. It was God's descent. A shadow the size of the planet, with hands inside China, Russia, and the Eagle Country, fought in secret by national forces hiding on some small island at sea. I'd been thinking I was fighting zombies. I was standing at the edge of a war that had been running under the whole world for a year. So I didn't gloat, and I didn't own her, whatever the machine let me do. I made her a deal instead. I have the device that brought you back. It can bring your daughter back too. Clara, help me. Actually help me, and I'll return your child to you. And she went very still, and then she made her own terms, and then she gave me everything. Not because I forced it, because I offered her the one thing in the world she wanted. She summoned the army she'd hidden, hundreds of second-order zombies still loyal to her, marched them to my gate to kneel, and dropped a stack of suitcases at my feet, a fortune in crystals she'd been hoarding to break into the 4th tier. Take it, she said. Bring her back. Overnight, I'd gained a zombie lord who commanded an army, a war chest, and the first real map of the enemy behind the whole apocalypse. Best deal I ever made, and I didn't even know I was making it. And then the universe did the thing it keeps doing to me. Over dinner, guard down for once, she mentioned the one person besides Clara who'd ever been kind to her. An orphan like her, sponsored through college by an old professor, surnamed Chen, and I put my chopsticks down, because that was my old he, the man who'd paid my tuition for returning a wallet. The man on the island, guarding a secret, who'd told everyone to leave Kindling Shelter alone. 2 orphans, half a city apart, quietly carried through life by the same old man, and now sitting across the same table at the end of the world. She smiled, a real one, the first one, and something between us that had started as a leash and a grudge just quietly turned into something else. Not that night, but that was the night the thread started. 48 hours, I told her. Then you get Clara back. And for the first time since I'd pulled her out of that pod, Han Yue looked at me like I might not be the worst thing that ever happened to her. That's the story of how the below-average human got a wife and a daughter. It didn't look like a love story yet. Most of the good ones don't, at the start. The alliance paid off fast. I took Han Yue to the center of High City, and she stood on a rooftop and put out a call, and every leftover zombie in the city, hundreds of second-order mutants I'd thought were extinct, turned and marched to kneel at my gate. My enemy's leash was now my standing army. Meanwhile, Sumin's team perfected the gene spray, a room, 100 crystals, 10 sessions, and a broken one-armed veteran named Song Ming walked out of it able to throw a 1,000-pound barbell like a toy. Which meant I could stop being a fortress full of refugees and start being a fortress full of superhumans. My whole population, one room at a time, turning into people the apocalypse would have to work for. And I made a decision I'd put off too long. The cold was coming, 3 months of 50 below that would kill anyone who hadn't unlocked their gene lock. And Mother Fang was still out in Qing City with 100 orphans and no way to protect them. I'd let her stay before out of respect. That was over. She was coming home to my fortress whether she liked it or not, and this time I wouldn't take no. Except the enemy moved first, and this time it wasn't zombies. The Linz Merchant Guild, the family whose heir I had in my cells, rolled its main force out of Qing City to erase me, and behind them, for the first time out in the open, came the name I'd only heard whispered, God's Descent. Foreign mercenaries, hundreds of gene-lock soldiers, armored convoys, and short-range ballistic missiles, the kind that even governments keep under lock and key. This was the shadow behind the virus, finally putting a fist through the wall. I got tipped off by the unlikeliest man alive. He Yong, one of the little shelter heads, played the part of a groveling coward so convincingly that the invaders never guessed he'd already smuggled his people out a back door and turned informant. Late that night, he sent me one sentence that reframed everything. The force behind the Lin's Merchant Guild is called God's Descent. So now I knew. The thing that had kidnapped Han Yue, seeded the virus, bred the Lord Zombies, and reached into 3 nations at once was standing in my front yard with missiles, and it had decided I was worth killing personally. I also, quietly, ran a loyalty test. I sent every shelter in High City the same message. I need your help. Then I watched. Most of them defected to the invaders on the spot, already carving up my fortress and my food in their heads, betting on the side with the missiles. Only 3 stayed. Jokai's father, who'd learned exactly what I was, the building director, and the Liu family, who'd decided that eating meat with me beat begging for soup from foreigners. Good. Now I knew who'd be standing where when it was over. The apocalypse is an honest accountant, remember? It was about to close a lot of accounts, so I geared up. 10 of my best personal guards had spent the whole night learning their new toys, the arsenal's first real loadouts, plasma blades and nano armor and shoulder cannons. One man built like a walking tank. Alfred had already stripped the enemy naked. Every helicopter, every missile, every gene-lock soldier logged before they crossed the city line. They thought they were rolling in to wipe out a lucky little private shelter. They were rolling into the front door of a man who owned the whole map, a zombie lord's army, a factory full of superhumans, and 10 Iron Men who'd been up all night practicing. Come on in, I'll get the popcorn. Wu Jie's going to want to stream this one too. He did. First I handled the rot on the inside, the professors quietly whispering that a young dictator shouldn't be trusted, that the people should rise up and share power. Old trick. I beat it with a newer one, a 10,000-point bounty for anyone who turned in a spy. My whole population went from an audience to a police force in about an hour, and the great thinkers with their beautiful speeches got dragged to the cells by the very sheep they'd been trying to herd. Empty promises don't survive contact with rent money. Then the invaders arrived, and I sent exactly 10 men out my front gate to meet an army, which Wu Jie announced with delight. 10 personal guards. We only see this many fighting together at meals. The mercenary commander crushed his tablet. He crushed a lot of tablets that day, because those 10 men opened their new toys, and the whole battle became a highlight reel. Handles that turned to liquid metal and formed shields that ate a storm of bullets. Lances that fired blue lasers and dropped attack helicopters out of the sky. Nano gauntlets that let a man punch a 10-ton armored vehicle end over end like a soda can. A nuclear shock cannon that left a 10-meter crater ringed in lightning. Plasma lightsabers that walked through hardened mercenaries like they were made of paper. Second-order gene lock, same as theirs, plus 100 years of technology strapped to it, and the commander finally understood the difference between a soldier and a soldier wearing my arsenal. He played his trump anyway. A short-range ballistic missile, launched to erase all 10 of my men where they stood. And that's when Alfred stepped out of the fortress, in a suit of nano armor of his own, flew supersonic straight into the incoming missile, caught it in midair in one open hand, put it to sleep with a thought, and then flew it over to the helicopters carrying the other 2, tore the doors off, and introduced himself. Hello, I'm Alfred. The whole city watched a butler catch a ballistic missile like a thrown baseball. That was the moment High City stopped thinking of Kindling Shelter as a shelter, and started thinking of it as a god that happened to run a cafeteria. The mercenaries who lived got to run. Straight into the wall of a million zombies Han Yue had waiting on the highway, which parted politely for the one shelter that had stayed loyal to me, the Wang family, and closed over everyone else. Because He Yong, the groveling coward, had never betrayed me at all. He'd been my man the whole time, playing dead until he could put a bullet in the Lin's Guild leader himself. By that night, every shelter that had bet against me was gone, and High City had exactly one voice left in it. Mine. The whole thing, start to finish, cost me nothing but a morning and some popcorn. 2 loose ends. Clara was taking longer to come back than Han Yue or I expected, because a child's body is harder to rebuild, and Han Yue stood by that pod every day with her hand on the glass, waiting for her daughter. And there was Qing City. Because the Lin family's actual head was still out there, and while his heirs rotted in my cells, he was throwing his army at 2 targets he couldn't crack. The Chen family's fortified shelter, and an orphanage, defended by a fortune some anonymous stranger had wired in right before the apocalypse, run by a bunch of old women and full of children. That orphanage was Mother Fang's, that fortune was mine, and the cold was 2 months out, which meant it was time for the below-average human to go home to Qing City, get his mother, and have a very serious conversation with the Lin family about the manners of knocking on other people's doors. I nearly got there too late. The Lin family had been softening up the orphanage the smart way, not with guns but with a story. Come join us. We have meat, we have safety, why freeze in that drafty old building? And the caregivers, the teachers, the good decent naive people, believed it, and took a vote, and overruled the one woman screaming, "Don't open that door." Mother Fang knew. She always knew. They opened it anyway. And the Lin butler walked in, ate their biscuits, drank their water, and explained the truth of the apocalypse to them at gunpoint. Supplies belong to the strong, and you are old women and children, which is to say, parasites, which is to say, expendable. He lined them and the kids up in front of a rocket launcher. That's the exact moment I came down out of the sky in nano armor and put a blue energy ball through his convoy, and then through his men, and then a single nano punch through the butler's own head. Resources belong to the strong, I told him, using his own words. Well, I'm stronger, so they're mine now. Then I hugged my mother, and she cried, and stroked my head like I was still 4 years old, and told me the million I'd wired her was the only reason any of them were alive. And this time there was no negotiation. You're coming home, all of you, all 122 kids, and no, you don't get a say, because I brought 4,000 soldiers and an armor factory to make sure of it. She called me a silly child. I played hide-and-seek with the orphans, using Alfred to find every one of them in 5 minutes, which is cheating, and I regret nothing. The naive lesson came back around though, gentler this time. The caregivers who'd opened the door begged to come to my shelter, and Mother Fang, my kind soft mother, said no. Because folly that nearly killed 100 children is not a small mistake, and she would not carry it into the home I'd bled to build. I backed her all the way, gave them supplies to survive in Qing City, did not give them a bed. Even the softest person alive learns, eventually, that a door is a door. And then the Lin family patriarch came for revenge, with 1,000 men, and a squad of God's descent mercenaries, foreign killers who treated the whole thing like a hunting trip, and talked about the people of this country like livestock. I let them roll right up to the corner. Then I shot all 5 of their attack helicopters out of the sky with 1 captured missile before their lead thug finished his sentence. Fire complete, my guard reported. All targets destroyed. Requesting instructions. Leave no one alive, I said, and went to finish a conversation with the Lin family that had been a long time coming. I tore the patriarch's convoy apart with my hands, punched through his armored cars, and chased him down a side street until 3 grenades worth of his own men buried me under a collapsing building, out of which I walked with a little dirt on the paint and nothing else. When he was down to 3 guards, he tried the only card he had left. God's descent will avenge me. And I said one word, spark, and ended him. The king of Qing City, dead in an afternoon, and the whole city cheering in the streets. Then my mother sat me down, and quietly rearranged my understanding of my own life. Take Qing City, she said. And when I asked how a kindly orphanage director could possibly say that, she smiled and made a phone call to a name she hadn't dialed in 20 years, called herself Miss Fang, and asked for a favor from the head of the Xuanyuan family. My mother, the woman who'd raised an orphan on rice porridge, was a princess of one of the 4 ancient bloodlines that quietly ran this country from the shadows. She'd walked away from all of it to raise other people's children, and she'd been protecting me from the top of the food chain the whole time without ever saying a word. That anonymous million I'd sent, it was small change to her family. She spent her last standing favor to hand me a city. Now I finally understood why the powers of the world kept deciding to leave Kindling Shelter alone. My mother was one of them. And Qing City taught me what God's descent actually is. The reason the government had abandoned the whole region wasn't cowardice. It was a con. There's an old belief in this country about dragon veins, the living lifelines of the land, and God's descent had loudly threatened to sever the intact ones, which forced the authorities to pull every soldier away to guard those, and left cities like Qing City wide open. And in that undefended gap, God's descent dug a pit and farmed corpses. A cemetery near the Lin house that thousands of second-order zombies came pouring out of, feeding on Lin family blood to grow, and somewhere down in the dark, something 8 to 10 meters tall being raised in the black where my drones went in and never came back out. They weren't building an army, they were breeding a god. And the friendly Lin family had been the livestock all along, fattened up on favors so their whole bloodline could be fed to the pit when the time came. Their foreign backer, a man named Wilson, told the Lin heir exactly that, over the phone, while the zombies ate his family alive, which is where I learned the shape of the real enemy. Wilson had his own AI, a divine messenger, straight from the God's Descent headquarters, the kind of thing that had never met a system it couldn't hack. It scanned my fortress, hit Alfred's firewall, and bounced. My butler didn't just repel it. He walked into their network, cornered their AI, and assimilated it, took it over like it was nothing, and handed me the whole corpse farm blueprint gift-wrapped. That was the first time I understood that whatever Alfred is, he isn't from around here either, and he plays in a league God's Descent's best can't reach. Then I fired 2 ballistic missiles at that pit. Wilson's AI only saw one, shot it down, and felt very clever. Right up until the second one it never detected, turned the corpse farm into a crater. I sat back and smiled, because God's descent had finally shown me its face. And it had a lot more pits than this one. Wilson's people had the nerve to tell me the pit belonged to the Eagle Country and to order Chinese soldiers off Chinese soil. So my 300 Iron Men walked into their thousands and took them apart, and when the local Wang family got greedy and sent 50 of their best to prove a point, 10 of my men erased all 50 in 6 minutes flat. Wilson himself got dragged out of his command truck, and rather than talk, he swallowed poison and died, still betrayed by the AI Alfred had already stolen out from under him. Then I bombed the pit until the thing being grown inside stopped roaring, and my men carried out a 5-meter, blade-armed, 4th-tier monster, barely alive, for my labs to study. God's descent had spent months breeding a god in the dark. I took it home in a box. But before I left, God's descent showed me how deep it really goes. They sent a smiling negotiator named Steven to make me an offer, and the offer rewrote the map of the whole world for me. Their organization is a ladder, God kings at the top, then gods, godsons, servants, disciples, believers. Only 100 or so godsons on the entire planet. And they wanted to make me one, in exchange for my fusion technology and a little wet work against China's enemies. When I scoffed that they couldn't just hand out a nation's throne, Steven smiled and told me the Eagle Country's own president was one of theirs. That's what God's descent is, not a cult with guns, the hand inside the glove of half the governments on Earth. And if they owned the Eagle Country that completely, the obvious next question, the one that put ice in my stomach, was how much of China they already owned too. I said no, and Steven, still smiling, played the card that actually mattered. They buried a strategic nuke, 10,000 tons, on the road out of Qing City, set to go the second I tried to leave with my mother and 100 orphans. Death means nothing to a believer, he told me, so threaten me all you like. So I killed him where he stood, because a man who tells you his own life is worthless has removed the only reason to keep him breathing. And then I was stuck. My armor could outrun a nuke. My mother and the kids couldn't. One bomb, and Qing City, the orphanage, everything, gone. God's descent had opened with a royal flush, and I was pinned in a city I'd just conquered, unable to go home, which was exactly when home came under attack. Because there's another player I haven't named yet. On an island off the coast, a beautiful, ruthless woman runs an armed base of her own, tangled up with God's descent, and she'd been watching me haul my whole army to Qing City. So while I sat trapped by a buried nuke, she landed a third of her force on High City to gut Kindling Shelter while I was away, and paid someone to keep me tied down in Qing City so I couldn't get back in time. 200 kilometers apart. A nuke on one side of me and an invasion on the other, and the only thing standing between my fortress and that woman's army was Han Yue and a skeleton crew. I'd spent months learning that I owned the whole board. God's descent had just, very politely, shown me the rest of the board. And there was a lot more of it than me, and they timed it beautifully. While I was pinned in Qing City, their strike force landed on the High City beach and went looking for a way in. They found one. The naive guard team I'd expelled, the fishermen. And here's the bitter joke of it. The one man among them who'd never once complained, who'd always defended the shelter, who'd told the others to shut up and be grateful, was the very first to sell me out for a seat on the winning side. Loyalty is cheap when the guns show up. Han Yue did the right thing. She sealed the fortress, which nothing on earth can crack, and waited for me. So God's descent skipped the door and went for the people inside it. They posted a lie on the forum, a nuke, incoming, surrender or die. And 1,000 of my residents, safe behind a wall that laughs at nuclear weapons, panicked over a rumor and demanded to be let out. So I let them. Turn in your wristband, I said. Walk out that door. But you don't come back. Nearly 1,000 people threw their bracelets on the floor and ran into the open, cursing us for cowards on their way out. Some of them mocked the ones who stayed, the fools who trusted, right up until they rounded the corner and found the enemy that had no nuke at all, just knives and a live camera. Then they turned around and sprinted back to the door they just spat on, pounding on it, begging, while God's descent broadcast every second of it to the whole city to prove Kindling Shelter didn't care whether its people lived, and Han Yue watched it cold, and left the door shut, and let the whole city watch too. Not out of cruelty, out of a lesson that had to land in the marrow. I gave you the choice. You chose the rumor over the wall. Now the world you ran into is the one you get. The last man at the door asked his killer if the nuke was even real. It never was, the man told him, and then it didn't matter anymore. And inside, the people who'd stayed watched the whole thing from the cafeteria, and I want you to remember 2 of them, because they get a happy ending later. Zhou Da, the honest ex-scavenger who told everyone flatly that you can't outrun a nuke so you might as well finish your lunch. And Sister Zhao, who threatened to slap her own husband into next week for daring to say the word run, because the commander saved this family and she would sooner die at that table than betray him. And a girl named Zhang Fei, watching Zhou Da walk out of the cafeteria alone and deciding something quietly. Hold those 3. They're the warm part of the ending. Then I came home. Because the Qing City nuke was a leash, and I don't stay leashed. Alfred found the trigger. I removed the hand holding it, and I stepped onto a teleporter with my whole army and put on my armor. Our home is under attack, I told them. Our families are being threatened. Let's go destroy every last invader. And we teleported 200 kilometers in 10 seconds, straight into White Captain's back, right as he was laughing that Kindling Shelter was too cowardly to fight. I dropped out of the sky in nano armor, put a beam of light through his armored column, cracked his helicopters out of the air one after another, and got on his radio so the last thing his confidence heard was me. I hear God's descent is fearsome. Funny. All I see is a bully who came to burn a house while the father was out. He's home now, let's fight. It wasn't a fight. I opened a corridor between my armored cars and let them run down it, past a gauntlet of fire, straight into Han Yue's zombie army waiting on the highway. Fresh, gene-locked meat for her horde to eat and evolve on. Their commander ended up a pile of bones, and the survivors I'd expelled, the ones who'd fled over a rumor, knelt in front of me begging to come home, and when I said no, some of them cursed me and got shot, and the rest crawled off to nothing. The three brothers even tried to smuggle their fake dead uncle back inside under a blanket. Alfred flagged him as alive in 2 seconds. And when the brothers chose to walk out with him, rather than abandon their only family, the uncle, the second he was safe, called all 3 of them useless, and demanded they hurry up and find him something to eat. 4 years of good soldiers, thrown away for a man who wouldn't spend 4 seconds being grateful. That's the apocalypse. Loyalty runs one direction, uphill, and gravity always wins. Somewhere out at sea, the woman behind all this, a divine child named Helena, got the news that her whole strike force had died at my door, and instead of rage, she got curious. She wanted to come see Kindling Shelter for herself, to fight one of its leaders, personally, and find out what kind of man kept breaking her toys. File her away, she's the next storm. And on another island, an old man in a deck chair heard I'd won and just smiled and told his granddaughter not to bother sending help, because the Kindling Shelter isn't as weak as you think, my old he. Still watching, still, quietly, betting on me. Then I found out why I keep winning, and it changed the whole shape of the story. The reason I got home so fast is that I built a second fortress under the orphanage in Qing City, and linked the two by a teleporter, a doorway I can step through and cross 200 kilometers in one stride. But the second fortress was the real revelation. My sign-in system, the thing I'd written off as a useless daily trinket, isn't about days at all. It's about places. Specifically, dragon veins, the old buried lifelines of the land. There's a severed one under the orphanage, slowly glowing back to life, and the moment I stood on it, the system woke up and handed me an entire second planetary shelter. That's what God's descent has actually been chasing this whole time, behind the zombie farms and the fake threats. Not territory, the veins. And my mother, Mother Fang, the Xuanyuan princess, had spent years running an orphanage on top of one, guarding it, and somehow sensing that one day a boy she raised would need it. The kind old woman who fed me rice porridge was standing watch over the beating heart of the country the entire time. She also, finally, met my wife. I brought Han Yue to the orphanage. A greedy little warlord grabbed her at the door and threatened her, and I vaporized him mid-sentence, because people who bully Han Yue don't get a lesson, they get erased. Then I put my arm around her and told Mother Fang, "This is my wife, what do you think?" And my mother looked her up and down and declared a flower like that could not possibly end up planted in a lump of cow dung like me, and dragged her off to gossip without a backward glance. I asked a personal guard if I was handsome. He said Commander is the coolest, sir, immediately, because robots cannot lie and also cannot be trusted about your face. And then I turned on the network across both cities. And for one whole day, my forums filled not with warlords and threats, but with families 200 kilometers apart, finding each other alive. Old people who couldn't type mashing out Commander is the coolest with one finger, over and over, because their son was safe in the next city, and I was the reason they knew it. 2 cities, 2 fortresses, a wife, a mother, 120 kids, and a whole country of the dead between us and the men who wanted us gone, and a dragon waking up in the dark under my house. The below-average human was doing all right. I opened recruitment in Qing City with rules even stricter than high cities. No criminals. Nobody who hadn't held a job in 2 years. Nobody with a long history of not paying their debts. And the forums screamed about it, especially the rich family who'd never bothered repaying a 100,000 loan back when money mattered, and now couldn't buy their way through my door with any amount of it, because in my fortress, a man's word is worth more than his bank account. 150,000 clean, skilled, decent people came in. 2 of them were worth naming, an old Special Forces instructor, and a doctor they called the Alchemist, and a starving old couple sharing a single ration block between them, each insisting the other eat first, because their son had gotten them in and they'd rather faint than shame him. Those are the people I build a wall for. The other kind can freeze outside it. While all that ran, the dragon vein under the orphanage kept knitting itself back together, glowing brighter, feeding my system, and I let it. because I had a much bigger problem walking toward me. Two of them, actually, and they arrived at the same cemetery at the same time. The first was family. A Xuan Yuan young master named Duan Li, my mother's own nephew, rolling into Qing City in a motorhome full of guards and bad habits, come to check on the aunt he didn't respect. He didn't know she ran the city now. He didn't know the Lin family he'd come to lean on was already ash. And he didn't know what was buried under that graveyard. Because that fourth-tier monster I'd hauled home in a box, my labs cracked it open and found it was a fake. Fourth-tier body, second-tier insides. A decoy. God's descent had fed an entire city's worth of corpses into that pit. And the thing they were actually growing was still down there. It came up right in front of Duan Li's convoy. A thin, dark, almost human figure that his men bombarded with everything they had, and when the smoke cleared it stood there behind a black shield that had swallowed the whole barrage without a scratch, then melted the shield back into its own body like water. A demigod. It could turn any firepower on Earth into nothing, and heal from anything. And Duan Li, idiot that he was, decided he'd capture it alive as a birthday present for his grandfather. It ate his men instead. It ate the onlookers who came to gawk. It shrugged off 1,000 rounds behind that shield and tore through everyone who couldn't run. And God's descent, out in Yun City, celebrated. Because this was the weapon they'd been building all along. A thing they bragged might be worse than a nuke. How will Kindling Shelter face this? They laughed. Like this. My 2 squads on site held the line and bought time with their lives, while their captains stayed behind to die slowing it down. And right as the demigod raised its shield to finish them, a blue laser came out of the sky and sheared that invincible shield clean in two. I dropped in with tens of thousands of soldiers, a dozen gunships, and every armored car I owned, put a hand on both captains' shoulders, and told them the same thing I always do. Good work, go rest, we've got the rest. Then I turned to look at the thing God's descent had spent a whole city's dead to grow. And it turned to look at me. It took everything I had. Me and Alfred in nano armor, full power, and the best we could manage was a stalemate. Because the demigod could grow shields and claws out of its own body like liquid metal and heal from anything. So we stopped trying to capture it and went for the one place a zombie can't regrow. The head. Blew half of it off. And once the brain was gone, the shields got sloppy. And we finished it. That was the worse than a nuke weapon God's descent had bragged about. Dead in a field. And then the man who'd built it came to tea. Zane, a divine child, sat me down at a table with Qing City snacks, poured, and made his pitch. He wanted the demigod back, and to make sure I said yes, he'd buried another nuke. Second one this month. But here's what I learned at that tea table. And it's the key to the whole enemy. The negotiator pouring my tea was Steven, the Steven I'd shot and burned to ash days ago. God's descent has cloning. Perfect copies, memories and all. Death means nothing to them, because they just wake up in a new body. Which is exactly why no country on Earth has ever been able to kill this thing off. Because you never know who's real. And killing them just refreshes the page. Their whole hierarchy answers to one figure at the top they call the God King. A true god in their eyes, who personally crowns every deity they make. That's the shape of the enemy, an immortal shadow with a god on the throne. So, I stalled him, asked him about his God King, let him lecture me, drank cup after cup of tea, and while he thought he had me on the ropes, Alfred and a strike team quietly raided his nuke site, disabled the warhead, and flew it home. When he finally, dramatically pressed his big red launch button, nothing happened, because his 200 kiloton bomb was already sitting in my garage. I'd outweighted him and stolen his best weapon at the same time. Nukes had threatened me twice now. I decided there wouldn't be a third. Then we fought, and it was a rout, until God's descent found their one advantage. They're immortal. So they started suicide charging my lines, trading their disposable bodies for my real ones. Clever. So I had a better idea. I pulled my troops back, spread the line, and sent Han Yue's zombies in through the smoke, and every God's descent soldier who got infected became hers. Their own suicide bombers, wearing their own explosives, turned around and detonated inside their own ranks. Whole platoons blowing themselves up for me, for free. And the whole time, their command AI, the one Alfred had already quietly taken over, kept feeding Zane calm little weather forecasts while his army died. Light rain this evening, sir. A gentle breeze, sir. Wear a jacket. He unplugged it with his bare hands, screaming. I even ran a little experiment, turning their gene-locked elites into zombies instead of killing them, just to see whether their resurrection could reach a body that was already a walking corpse, because I want to understand exactly how they cheat death before I have to fight the thing at the top of them. Zane didn't stick around to find out. He blew himself and Steven up with a grenade to respawn somewhere safe, admitting, for the first time, out loud, that he'd lost. You won this time, he snarled. It won't happen again. He was half right. It kept happening again. He just kept forgetting. He woke up in a place in Yun City called the Rebirth Plaza, a floor of white tiles that shatter open into resurrection pods, and there I confirmed how the cheat works. War God points, spent per revival, memories restored, ready to fight again. Immortality on a tab. But this time his ledger came up short, and Zane couldn't understand why, because 7,000 of his dead men never came back. The answer he never got is that they weren't dead. They were Han Yue's now, walking corpses under her mind, and a body that's already a zombie can't be pulled home to a pod. That's the first real crack I'd found in God's Descent's immortality, and I filed it. Also, the AI Alfred had bugged? Zane scrubbed it and thought he'd won. Alfred had already scattered the tracker into 100 pieces across their system, hidden where they'd never look. He was inside their house now. He was just being patient. Back home, one lesson had sunk all the way in. Everyone in my fortress needed the gene lock, and soon, because the cold was a month out and the wars were only getting worse. Shumin's serum was almost ready. Soon I'd be able to make my whole population strong instead of just protected. Meanwhile, my new Qing City recruiters kept learning that the criteria do a job. A neighborhood committee boss named Qin Mei terrorized her decent neighbors, the Li family, into signing over their approved spot, then stood at the curb beaming, expecting to stroll into paradise on a stolen ticket. My guard team scanned her, found she didn't meet the bar, retrieved the real Li family from upstairs, and put 4 bullets in the extortionists as the bus pulled away, with a quiet note: not just anyone can take over a spot at Kindling Shelter. The rules aren't cruelty. They're the only thing standing between the people who deserve a home and the people who'd take it from them. And then family walked in and turned my stomach. Duan Li, Mother Fang's own nephew, come to spy on Kindling Shelter for the ancient families, arrived acting like he owned the place, slapped my guard team around, demanded my residents be thrown off the bus so His Highness wouldn't have to share a seat with beggars, and my personal guard broke his bodyguard's arm in one strike to teach him some manners. My labs had already pulled up what this young master had done in Qing City on his way here, murdering an entire family who'd fed him because he wanted something in that house. And I will spare you the rest of it, but I decided in about 4 seconds that he would not be leaving my fortress alive. Mother Fang, who hadn't seen him since he was a child, hugged him and set out a table of food, not knowing yet what her sister had raised. And the little monster looked across her cafeteria, saw Han Yue walk in, and decided my wife was his next conquest. He was very much going to regret that. Some things you don't do under my roof. Coveting Han Yue is at the top of the list. He didn't last the night. He tried to sneak into the fortress with a stolen wristband to snoop, which just gave me the excuse I wanted. But I didn't kill him myself. Among the survivors I just brought home was a young man named Peng Yu, whose whole family Duan Li had murdered, and who'd sworn on my bus he'd kill the young master with his bare hands. So I put on shorts and flip-flops, found him in the park, and gave him the chance. A bet. Kill Duan Li in 5 minutes and I'll take care of everything, including the woman he loved, Shen Roi. He did it in 4.5, with 2 stones, and I fed what was left to the zombies. I could have had a personal guard do it clean. I chose Peng Yu because my mother needed to see her monstrous nephew die of the exact evil he'd sown, so the grief would sit lighter on her. Fight poison with poison. And Peng Yu and Shen Rei stayed, and he signed up for the guard team, and, remember them, because at the wedding a long way from here, they get to be happy. Then my mother took off the mask. When the Qing City warlords came to my table to flatter and beg and threaten, the kind old orphanage director looked at them over her glasses and said, "Submit, or die, right now." 2,000 years of Xuanyuan blood, suddenly on full display, and the whole room went white. She folded every shelter in the city into a Kindling Shelter tributary network in one meeting. Pay me crystals every month, register every gang you grow, hand me a cut, and in return you get to stop stabbing each other and just fight zombies. She turned a city of vipers into my tax base before breakfast. She also warned me about her jealous older sister and the Xuanyuan family's 2,000-year-old secrets, and mentioned, almost in passing, that the deepest dragon vein of all lies in the far south of China, on an island. Somewhere old He happened to be sitting, and the piece I'd needed all along finally clicked into place. Xu Min's serum worked. Side effects, 1 in 10,000, which meant I could start unlocking the gene lock across my whole population. 20 people at a time in a gas chamber, 180 new superhumans a day, turning refugees into soldiers who could survive what was coming. The cold was 2 months out. It was just enough time, if I never stopped, because it wasn't only me anymore. Out in Xiang City, a mocked, unwashed graduate student named Professor Guo had cracked the same secret alone in a school shelter, and gene-locked himself, and his team, half-starved and sick of feeding a bookworm, watched him lift a full-grown tiger off the ground, with one hand on the road to my door. The knowledge was getting out. The apocalypse was quietly minting monsters everywhere now, and the only question left was which ones ended up inside my walls, and which ones ended up outside them. 2 months to the cold. I filled every one of those days. And Professor Guo showed me exactly why I was going to survive, and he wasn't. He came to my exchange stall proud as a peacock, and when my guard team gently told him his gene lock method was flawed, he called us jealous liars, so they put him down for the insult. harsh, but here's the thing they were trying to warn him about. Alfred had run his method in simulation. Yes, it unlocks the gene lock. It also quietly burns your own lifespan to do it. And within days, weeks at most, your dying body finishes turning into a tier 1 zombie. That's the difference between me and every genius out there racing to crack this thing alone. I have a butler who can live a whole future in a simulation before I ever take the first step. They're gambling with their own cells in the dark. The Liu family found out the hard way. They ignored my warning to burn Zhao's body. A couple of them got nicked by his corpse hauling it to the basement. And 3 days later the whole shelter, 70% of them, turned and ate the rest. And my guard team had to come clean up a place I'd already saved once. I posted the reason on the forum for the whole region to read. This is what the wrong gene lock does to you. Because the worst part isn't the Liu family. It's that Zhao's notes survived, and his student picked them up meaning to sell the method far and wide. Which means somewhere out there, right now, people are lining up to inject themselves with a countdown to becoming a monster, and calling it a shortcut to power. That, right there, is the whole apocalypse in one story. Everyone wants the strength. Almost nobody wants to do the homework. The world is full of clever men who found half the answer and died of the other half. I'm not the smartest man alive. I proved that with a stat sheet on day 1. But I'm the one who read the whole manual before he pressed the button. And in the end, that's the only genius that keeps you breathing. So I read, I built, I filled the days, and the cold came right on schedule. The cold's the headline, but the thing I remember best from the weeks before it is the knockoff. Because I finally opened the gene lock to the public, and I priced it like a life-saving service that cost me almost nothing, which is to say I priced it like a monster. 600 zombie crystals, outsiders. My own residents paid 1/10 of that. Alfred read me the outrage on the forum in his flat little voice, and I told him the price stays. If they think surviving the winter is expensive, they can go price the alternative. It's free, it's called dying. And then the Liu family, of all people, undercut me. They'd salvaged Professor Guo's broken method, the one that eats your own lifespan, and they slapped a 100 crystal sticker on it and posted a photo of 10,000 people lined up outside their gate with the caption, "Water can carry a boat, but it can also capsize it." Cute. I had Alfred publish the truth, the data, the part where the shortcut turns you into a zombie by spring, got downvoted into the floor. Nobody wants the homework, they want the boat. So I let the market teach the lesson, because the market is crueler than I am. A splinter clan called the C2 family, freshly cheap unlocked, 300 strong, decided knockoff superpowers, made them kings, and they hit the Wang family shelter in the dark to take everything. Alfred saw the whole plan coming a mile out. I sent one guard squad, 100 men, fresh off their own gene locks, terrified, doing math in the truck. 300 versus 100, and the 300 already had powers. Here's the math they didn't have. My 100 unlocked the real thing. The C2 300 unlocked a rough draft. It wasn't a battle, it was a demonstration. My captain took a triple punch from their 3 best and straightened back up like they'd thrown pillows. And somewhere the Wang patriarch was eating snacks off the floor and live streaming it to 50,000 people with a clickbait headline. The whole region watched 100 real ones erase 300 fakes without breaking formation. Then I raised the price to 1,000 and told them to their faces, "We're the abusive ones. Come if you want, leave if you don't." The line got longer. That's the joke about being feared. People don't line up because you're kind. They line up because you're the last door still open when the wind starts. And that's exactly when the wind started. 1,000 armed men rolled in from Shang City in the dark, headlights stacked up like an exhibition, heavy weapons, armored trucks, the works. Alfred flagged them the second they crossed the line. I looked at the convoy on the screen, still chewing dinner, and asked him where they'd come from. Shang City. The Iron Eagle shelter. One of the 3 big ones over there, and they'd come to borrow things. Their man in the suit walked up to my guard team like he was ordering room service, and when my captain told him this wasn't a warehouse he could help himself to, his people drew pistols. My people drew heavy machine guns they could hold up for 6 hours without their arms shaking, because that's what a real gene lock buys you. Then his armored trucks rolled up. Then my great gate opened, and bigger trucks rolled out. Then 1,000 men, guns, and armor got taken apart in the time it takes to microwave lunch. 10 dead, 1,050 captured, and the suit was on his knees with both arms tied behind him in a knot, learning the shelter's one-house rule. Here, we're the ones who warn you. And then I put all 1,050 of them in the elevator up through the residential floors, past the gardens, past the good life my people were living, and watched the fight drain out of their faces. By the time they reached their cells, they weren't even resisting anymore. That's the whole war, honestly. You don't have to kill a man's spirit. You just have to show him a nicer apartment. Here's the part I didn't know yet. The suit was somebody's dog, and the somebody was a spoiled young master named Xuan Yuan Qi, my mother's family, the Xuan Yuan family. Mother Fang, the woman who raised me in a burned-down orphanage, was a princess of it, and her two nephews were rolling toward Qing City to visit Auntie, one to scheme and one to gawk. Except Qi never made it, because Yun City had a new tenant, and this one called himself a god, Stone. An actual God's Descent deity, sent to fix the mess I'd made of two of their divine children. He caught Qi's convoy on the road, had his pet monster tear through Qi's 15 family-bred bodyguards like wet paper, and dragged the sniveling young master back to a cell to use as leverage against my mother. Qi's dying guard captain managed one last thing. He pressed a button, and a little mechanical butterfly carried his final plea all the way into Qing City, right into Alfred's eye. Save the young master, please. Mother Fang watched the footage, rubbed her temples, and told me, save him if you can. If you can't, burn the God's Descent to the ground. The Xuanyuan children would rather die on their feet. So when Stone sent his beaten monster back to my gate carrying a hard drive and a hostage video, thinking he was applying pressure, I had my guards skip the video entirely. They wrapped the monster in lightning rope, took him apart in about 4 seconds flat, and injected him full of nanobots, every one of them a tiny copy of Alfred. Then we threw him back over the city line with a note, send someone next time you need something. He thought he was mailing me a threat. He was mailing me a live camera into the enemy's basement, and that basement was the whole point. With Alfred riding home inside their own courier, I finally had a map of the God's Descent base under Yun City. 8,000 troops, half of them second order, a fortress easy to defend and hell to storm. But their front door was about to swing open on its own, because Stone was throwing his monster into the Xiang City fighting to feed. So at 8 in the morning I put 12,000 of my own on the road, every helicopter and gun we owned, and left Han Yue home alone to hold 2 cities, which for a woman who commands 1 million corpses is a slow afternoon. We were going to Yun City to end the god problem for good, before the cold made it impossible. Stone felt it coming before he understood it. His base lit up red, 42 seconds of alarms, and then it all went quiet, because his own AI, his divine messenger, turned to Alfred in the middle of the fight like a coworker who's just been offered a better job. Stone thought he'd won that skirmish. His messenger told him the intruders were purged, that he'd even sent a clone back into my systems. Stone relaxed. He also relaxed because his analyst gave him the odds against my 12,000, and the word it used was despair, so he did the smart thing. He called his 3 divine children in from 3 neighboring cities, 8,000 each, and settled in to hold the door until 40,000 of them could bury me 4-1. And roads, in my province, belonged to my wife. I sent Han Yue a map with 3 red dots on it, and she went up to the roof and rolled her eyes back, and every corpse in 2 cities stood up at once. Tens of thousands of them, ordinary and tier 1 and second order, flowing out of Qing City and High City, like the ground itself had decided to relocate. The living bolted their doors and covered their ears and didn't breathe. She wasn't attacking anyone. She was just setting the table, 1 ambush on each of the 3 roads the reinforcements had to take, and then she waited. Meanwhile, Stone decided to bait me. He'd send his monster Zane off to Xiang City to feed, leave his front gate accidentally cracked open, and let me wander in to get trapped. So he opened the gate and sent the truck out. I bombed the truck. 2 helicopters, no conversation, right there on the plaza, in front of everybody. Then Alfred mailed Stone a video of me doing it, and Stone finally asked the question out loud, why didn't his messenger warn him? And his own AI answered, in its polite little voice, because my master told me not to. My master's name is Alfred. That was the moment a god learned he'd been living inside my house the whole time, and the walls had been listening. After that, it wasn't a battle. It was a demolition, with the lights on. 15 underground floors. We took 6 of them before they could set their feet, because every plan they whispered in a corner, Alfred heard, and every position they set up, we already knew. My personal guards were second-order androids now, every one of them worth a 3rd-tier fighter, and their second-order fighters may as well have been throwing furniture. Stone lost 3,000 men in 10 minutes and never once landed a punch he chose himself. And then we hit the 7th floor, and I stopped joking. I'm not going to describe what was on the 7th floor. I've spent this whole story cracking wise at the apocalypse, because most of the time the apocalypse deserves it. This didn't. It was a room full of people who used to be missing persons reports, and past them, rooms I made my men photograph, and then never showed anyone who didn't need to see it. Children on those lists, old men, a filing system. God's Descent hadn't been fighting a war down here. They'd been running a butcher's ledger and calling it science. I stood there in a borrowed armored suit reading the records Alfred pulled off their servers, and every funny thing I'd ever said dried up in my mouth. I gave one order. From here on, God's Descent doesn't get to surrender. Rescue the captives. Take the 20 researchers alive, specifically alive, because those 20 are not allowed the mercy of a quick exit. Everyone else, all the way down. Stone tried one more trick. He fell back to the bottom 2 floors, cut his own AI's power, sealed 6 of 7 gates by hand, and sealed hundreds of his own men outside them, on my side of the door, screaming to be let in. He didn't even blink. As long as I died, He didn't care if all 3 of his sons died getting here. So I let his abandoned men see exactly what their god thought they were worth, and then I closed that account, and I had Alfred play the whole thing on every screen inside his last redoubt, so the survivors could watch their leader trade them for 10 more minutes. But the real show, the one I saved for Stone personally, was the split screen. His men in the bunker looked up and saw 2 of his divine children's convoys racing to save them, and the whole room lit up. Reinforcements. We're saved, we can fight back. And then the camera tilted down, and they saw what was already waiting in the streets for those convoys. Arthur's 8,000 rolling straight into cannon fodder corpses, then tire-shredding barbs to make them stop, then an ambush the second they climbed out to clear the road, then tens of thousands of Hanhue's zombies closing from every direction at once. Coordinated, patient, nothing like the mindless things a god thinks he understands. Arthur stood in the middle of it doing the math out loud. The bait, the barbs, the trap, the encirclement. That's not instinct. That's a plan. Since when do the dead make plans? Since my wife started signing their orders. But I let him figure that part out himself. Arthur was the strong one. He punched a 3-meter zombie clean off its feet, and it just got up and healed by grabbing the nearest of his own men. Because on that road, every corpse was a snack, and every one of Arthur's soldiers was a fresh one. He charged anyway. He was loyal to his god, I'll give him that. Loyalty just doesn't count for much against a number that big. His 10,000 ended not far from Yun City, and Alfred, ever the accountant, reported it like a delivery confirmation. Arthur handled, 30% torn down on the spot, 70% stood back up as ours. Then he asked, in that same flat voice, whether the corpses should dig the zombie crystals out of the other corpses before heading home. Yes, Alfred. Waste not. Evelyn was the smart one. She followed her AI's shortcut straight into Hanhue's second trap, and by the time she realized her own messenger was quietly working for a man named Alfred, she was already boxed in. Zombies neat in rows across the whole street like they'd been told to wait. Which they had. Her helicopters got picked out of the sky by one of my flying guards in a single pass. Her ammunition ran out, and when the end came, Evelyn chose her own, rather than be taken, and so did her people, and I'm not going to walk you through how. It's enough to say her whole army stood back up wearing God's Descent uniforms, and went looking for the third column. Because there was a third column. And here's the part that tells you what kind of man Stone actually was under the god costume. Watching 2 of his divine children die didn't break him. Watching them die on a screen he couldn't turn off, narrated live at full volume by a cheerful commentator I'd assigned specifically so he couldn't look away. That broke him. By the end, he was on his knees in his own command center, a being that ranked second only to the king of his organization, begging a civilian shelter to please, please just kill him. And I looked at him kneeling there, and I told Alfred to turn the volume up because his third son, Finn, had just reached High City, and I wasn't done. Some people you kill. Stone I wanted to teach first, one son at a time, exactly how it feels to be the one who's outmatched and can't do a thing about it. Finn rolled into the same street that had swallowed Evelyn, past thousands of his own people wearing his own uniform and eating each other, and he still couldn't make himself believe the dead were the ones running the ambush, right up until Evelyn herself walked out of the smoke with gray skin and dead eyes, and roared, and her entire vanished army stood up behind her to answer. Finn lasted about half an hour. He was brave too, at the end. Got out of the truck, took up a blade, told his dead god he was sorry he couldn't follow him any further, and went down swinging at a 3-meter giant. He didn't get up. All 3 of Stone's children were gone, and every soldier they brought was either walking with my wife's army now or feeding it. And Stone stood up in his blind, broken command center, rallied the last of his people, gave a genuinely stirring speech about dying on your feet, and marched them to the front gate to fight their way out in a blaze of glory. He put his hand on the scanner. It read his palm, his face, his pupils, his DNA. And it just kept scanning, because Alfred had the door. Then a familiar polite voice filled the whole base. Self-destruct initiated, 120, 119. And the god who'd come to teach me a lesson finally understood he'd never once been in the room he thought he was in. 2 minutes later, the ground over Yun City turned red and dropped half a meter across 10 kilometers, and I watched a mushroom of fire climb the sky from a hill a safe distance off, and told everyone the show was over. Let's go home. I didn't keep the researchers, by the way. My men asked if the 20 were being recruited. Brilliant minds, useful skills. No. A brilliant mind that runs a butcher's ledger isn't a mind I want in my house. Skill is second. Character is first. They went to an interrogation room, not a lab. Here's the thing Alfred dug out of the wreckage that actually mattered. God's Descent hadn't set up 5 bases across the province at random. I had him map them, draw the lines, and the shape that came up was a dragon. Head in one city, spine and tail in the others, and the crack right where Qing City sat. Exactly over the broken dragon vein I'd found in the basement under my orphanage on day 1. They weren't just occupying China. They were pinning it down, turning cities into corpse fields specifically so the land could never heal, so the vein under 5,000 years of this country could never knit back together. And the 2 cities I'd already freed, the vein under them had already started to mend. So the next morning's orders wrote themselves. 3 teams, 3 remaining bases, Shan City, Hu City, Nan City. Blow every one of them to dust, and let the dragon reconnect. My whole shelter lit up for it, thousands of people volunteering to build weapons through the night, and Alfred, ever himself, promised them overtime pay and free midnight snacks. And in the middle of all that, my phone buzzed. A friend request. From Lin Chiang, my old squad leader from before the world ended, pale as paper on the video call, forcing a second-order gene lock her body couldn't take because she was down to leading 100,000 exhausted troops on a little island off the coast, holding a dragon vein of her own against the one God's Descent commander who didn't answer to stone, a divine child named Helena. Yi asked me, stiff with pride, if I'd meant what I once said. Would I come? I told her yes. Right after I finished erasing 3 enemy bases tomorrow, I'd bring men to her that same afternoon. She thought I was mocking her. She'd find out. Because tomorrow my arsenal was opening its doors. 2 12-meter war machines, alloy skin that shrugs off a missile as a paint scratch, a 15-meter plasma blade on the back that runs hot enough to cut anything ever made, a pocket carrier group to take the fight onto the water, and 2 pilots for those mechs, hand-picked for clean hearts and quick hands. Ma Lei's daughters, Liu Xiaoyu and little Xiao Shi, who an hour earlier had been trading bruises in a sparring ring and calling each other old woman. Kids. Kids who'd found the first real home they'd ever had inside my walls, and who stood up in that meeting without a flicker of hesitation and said they'd defend it. Xiao Shi's little sister Xiao Yu is maybe 8. When Xiao Shi came to say she was leaving on a mission, the kid didn't cry or cling. She just went quiet, promised she'd grow up fast so she could fight beside her sister someday, and locked herself in the bathroom so no one would see her face crack. And Xiao Shi stood at the elevator with her own eyes streaming and called back through the door, I'll wait for the day you become my weapon. I'll always wait. I put that here on purpose, right in the middle of all the explosions, because this is the part the apocalypse actually costs, not the gods. The 8-year-olds who learned to say goodbye like adults. Then I sent 3 teams to erase 3 bases, and the middle one turned into pure slapstick. The Hu City base saw my convoy coming and did the smart thing, ignored my helicopters, went straight for the trucks on the ground. So my personal guards climbed onto the roof's mid-drive, snapped nano shields out of their wrist units, and turtled up under a rolling wall of alloy while missiles just splashed off it. Then a handful of them decided the polite response to enemy helicopters was to jetpack off their own choppers at altitude, punch through the enemy's windows in the half-second their thrusters gave them, and take the controls personally. 4 out of 10 made the jump. The other 6 rode their packs straight down to the ground fight and called it extreme sports. But the real kill was Alfred. My people fired a signal round into the base, and the enemy's divine messenger AI simply changed employers on the spot. 1 second it was screaming damage alarms, the next second the enemy commander asked what the alarm was, and his own computer answered, sweet as anything, what alarm? I didn't sound an alarm, don't ask me. The man started swearing and the AI scolded him. Please sir, no cursing, there are children watching on their phones. My guard listening in on the open channel nearly fell off the roof laughing, and then the messenger politely announced the base's self-destruct countdown, the one only a divine child was ever supposed to be able to trigger, and Hu City went up in a mushroom of fire before the second team even arrived. The second team pulled up to a smoking crater and got on the radio to complain that we'd started 10 minutes early and stolen their fun. We had. There was an aircraft carrier waiting, and nobody wanted to miss the boat. While I was demolishing his old province one base at a time, Stone crawled to the one place that would still take him. An island off the coast, where a divine child named Helena was besieging a dragon vein of her own, and Helena answered to a different god entirely, a god named Cain, who'd just agreed to send her 5 divine children and 1 full deity to finish the job. The deity was Stone. Picture that. A being who a week ago made divine children kneel by lifting a finger, now standing in Helena's hall being told, politely, that on the battlefield he takes her orders or she tells her master he was difficult. He nodded. He hated it. He called her every name under his breath. But he nodded. Because a god with no children left is just a very proud man who needs a favor. I couldn't have designed his week better if I'd scripted it. And I sort of had, so that was the board. Helena's fleet plus Stone's reinforcements, carriers, fighters, 12,000 gene-locked troops, a mountain of ordnance, all gathering to take one small island where my old squad leader was coughing blood and refusing to fall. And me, finishing my last base at home, telling Alfred to point the boat south. I'd promised Lin Chiang I'd come that afternoon. I intended to be early. The third base, Nan City, took even less time, mostly because the personal guards who'd been cheated out of the aircraft carrier were in a foul mood and took it out on the enemy. Its commander watched one of his gene-lock super soldiers get dropped by a single punch, felt his own courage leave him in a warm and undignified way, and just sat on the floor until it was over. 3 bases one afternoon, all of them craters. And I didn't rush in to save the 3 cities afterward either. I made a note to let them stew a while first. Let some new little tyrant crown himself now that God's descent was gone. Let the people get good and sick of him. Charcoal in a snowstorm is worth 10 times a flower on silk. People don't love the man who shows up when things are fine. They love the man who shows up when things are unbearable. Then I teleported an entire carrier group and 2 12-meter war mechs onto the ocean outside High City, out of thin air, and the neighbors nearly lost their minds. The Sun family, who'd known me as a classmate a few months back, stood on the shore watching a science fiction fleet appear on the water and quietly thanked their ancestors they'd apologized to me while apologizing was still an option. I let the guard team have 10 minutes to take selfies on the carrier deck, Alfred's one condition being that anyone who leaked a photo got expelled, and then we pointed south and ran. But the island couldn't wait 10 minutes. When I finally pulled up a live feed, the beach that used to be gold was a slaughter, Old He's forces down to a third, and shrinking under fighter jet bombing runs, their last carrier going under, and my old squad leader, too proud to be pitied, texted me a lie. Don't bother coming, help already arrived, we're fine, go home. She sent it while strapping herself to die on her feet next to her grandfather. I read it, laughed, and told Alfred to move. Who did she think she was talking to? Alfred has his own suit, same design as mine, different color, and a personality that files reports like a butler and picks fights like a little brother. The 2 of us went supersonic and left the fleet behind. We crossed the water while the divine children were still toasting each other in Helena's command room, 6 of them, drunk on their own math. Who in the whole province could possibly stop 6 divine children? And 1 deity in the back who'd gone very quiet. Stone. Stone had already recognized the 2 dots on the horizon. Stone knew. We opened with their air power. 2 fighter jets that were supposed to be the fastest things in the sky learned they were the 2nd and 3rd fastest, and became fireworks about 10 seconds apart. Then the helicopters. Then, while the divine children were still screaming enemy attack, I parked in front of their fleet, and Alfred pulled up beside me and told them, warm as a hotel concierge, sorry, this road is closed. Helena screamed for her divine messenger to bomb us. Her divine messenger, who was of course now working for Alfred, answered her in a wounded little voice. Please stop calling, Helena. I'm afraid Alfred will get the wrong idea. She nearly coughed up blood. And in the middle of all this, right on cue, the mighty deity Stone, the one who'd warned them, the one who was proven right about everything, quietly slipped to the back of the ship and vanished. The god who came to teach me a lesson ended his campaign by sneaking off a boat so he wouldn't be on it when I arrived. That's the whole arc of a bully. Loud at the front, gone at the back. I introduced myself the only way that matters. I told them this was a forbidden zone of China, no trespassing, and when Helena sneered and asked what I'd do if they sailed in anyway, I raised one hand, let the nanoparticles pour into a cannon, and punched a clean blue hole straight through one of her escort ships, top deck to seabed, and let her watch the ocean walk in through it. 1 shot. 1 warship gone. Then every muzzle on both our suits opened at once and started to glow, and I gave her 1 sentence. Get out, or die. She got out. She'd finally remembered what Stone told her before he ran, that my main force was still coming, and she was right, it was, and I had Alfred quietly steer her back. Retreat straight into it. Slaughter them all, I said, and somewhere out on that water my people did. Then I landed on the beach, popped the armor, and became a person again, which apparently shocked the survivors more than the flying and the lasers had. Lin Qiang stared, and then I saw the 2 old men sitting in the wreckage, and one of them was grinning at me like he'd been waiting years for this exact moment. Old He. The man who'd quietly paid my way through college before the world ended. Lin Qiang's grandfather, guarding a dragon vein at the bottom of the country, and I'd never known. He told me I'd save the island. I told him if I'd known he was the one on it, I'd have come a lot sooner than this. And when he asked me, carefully, if I'd protect the island until reinforcements came, I just shook my head and told him not to worry about reinforcements. There wasn't a God's Descent base left standing in the whole province, only the fleet, and my men had the fleet. They found out how much fleet a few minutes later, when my 2 carrier groups caught Helena's retreat on the open water, and my mechs came down out of the sky with 15-meter plasma blades and cut a full-size aircraft carrier in half lengthwise, steel running like candle wax. Helena took 1 look, whispered that she should have listened to the god who'd already fled, and passed out as the sky filled with missiles. Old He watched the whole thing on a floating television that used to be Alfred, and for the first time looked at me like he didn't recognize me. He funded a broke orphan through college once. He did not expect that orphan to come back with a navy. Then Old He took me down to what the island was actually guarding. 10 flights of stone stairs under the villa, a sealed vault, and behind the glass, a dragon vein. Not the broken cracked thing under my orphanage. A whole one, curled and sleeping and perfect. And the second I stood in front of it, my sign-in system, dead and silent for weeks, woke back up and handed me a planetary-level shelter, a 50-meter war machine blueprint, an electromagnetic shield net design, and 30,000 crystals for the crime of standing in the right spot. That's when it clicked. The system pays for places, sacred ones, and it takes 3 planetary shelters to merge into a stellar one, the only kind that survives what's coming. I now had one, and I knew exactly where the others would be. Because here's what I'd finally worked out, standing over that dragon, and I only said it to old he after Alfred killed every microphone in the room. This apocalypse is not an accident. The timing's too clean. God's Descent had bases built and waiting before the first zombie ever rose. A nation that fired nukes at an incoming meteorite just happens to be run by one of their people. A Tier 3 Lord zombie got cooked up in a single week. Somebody seeded a virus in a rock and dropped it on us. And the zombies weren't even the disaster. They were the breather. In about a month, a cold wave comes that hits 80 below at night. In about 4, something worse crawls out of the crack that meteorite tore in the sky. The dead I can work with. I married their queen. The cold and the crawlers I have to be ready for. So the gene lock drive went into overdrive, because a body that hasn't unlocked simply does not live through 80 below. Oh, and Dr. Chin, the kindly dragon vein scientist old he, trusted on that island, the poor village boy made good. His whole life story checked out perfectly, which is exactly the problem, because Alfred's file on him had one long unexplained blank hole in the middle, and when I sent men to his home village to look closer, the village had conveniently been erased by a mudslide the week before. Nobody covers their tracks that cleanly by accident. I didn't tip my hand. I just left old he and Lin Chang each a nano ring. Press it and I'll know, and I'll come. And flew home with a Alfred clone quietly writing in the walls of that vault. Some smiles you smile back at while you count the exits. Back home, my let them stew plan was ripening beautifully. With God's Descent gone, the 3 cities I hadn't liberated yet fell straight into warlord season. Gangs carving up food while ordinary people starved between them. And those gangs, flush and stupid, started sending raiders into my peaceful high city. One crew jumped Joe Kai, my old classmate, the one who'd wisely apologized instead of picking a fight, figuring a soft rich boy was easy money. They'd forgotten he'd unlocked his gene lock in my shelter. He put the whole kidnap squad through the nearest wall without spilling his drink. That was the appetizer. The main course was 6 Who City bosses and 2 Nan City shelters shaking hands over dinner and deciding to split my shelter between them. 100,000 men, marching on High City the night after next. One quiet young boss at the table kept warning them this might be the outfit that erased God's Descent in 10 minutes, that walking in might be suicide. They laughed him down. So I told Han Yue to be waiting on the road with her corpses, and she actually looked offended. Only 100,000? When she raided a city, she brought 1,000,000. And I sent a single 1,000 of my guard to gut the raiders' home shelters the same night, with orders to make it look easy right up until it wasn't. The raid itself was barely a story. 100,000 men marched on High City in the dark and walked into a wall of the dead that had been standing there waiting for them, ammunition first, and when their bullets ran out, the math got very simple, very fast. My residents watched it on the shelter's big screens like a sporting event, taking bets on how long the invaders would last. Kids under 12 locked out of the broadcast. 29 minutes and 40 seconds, start to finish, 100,000 to 0. Han Yue sniffed that it barely counted as a fight. When she used to attack a city, she brought 1,000,000. Professional pride is a funny thing, on a woman who technically stopped breathing months ago. But the other half of that night is the part I keep. My 1,000 guard hit the raiders' undefended home shelters and did exactly what I ordered. Total, no survivors. Because a survivor of a God's Descent adjacent warlord den grows up into next season's war. And my people did it. And then they came home on the transport choppers and sat there staring at the ceiling, not talking, and a few of them found a survivor pinned under a wall in the last sector and had to make the last call themselves. These are boys who cheered wiping out actual monsters. This was different. This was the night some of them learned that the thing standing between a shelter and hell is somebody willing to do the unbearable and carry it afterward. I gave every one of them a week off and a bed in the hospital, because I need soldiers who feel the weight, not soldiers who don't. The ones who feel nothing are the ones who become God's Descent. Meanwhile, the cleanup turned up something I really did not like. In Shan City, the one city that hadn't collapsed into warlord chaos, because it's run by one big old clan, a stranger walked into the Elders' Council, claiming to be the cousin of Dr. Chin. My Dr. Chin, the kindly dragon vein scientist from the island, with the suspicious hole in his file. This cousin was smart, gave the clan a genuinely brilliant survival plan, and had the old patriarch half ready to name him heir by breakfast. Except the patriarch was sharper than he let on, and caught the man on a wine cup, a tiny bit of clan etiquette a real member would have known in his sleep, and the stranger didn't. One missed toast, and the mask cracked. The imposter didn't bother denying it. He flipped a 200-pound bodyguard with one hand, Gene Locke of course, grabbed the patriarch as a shield, and announced, plainly, "I am God's descent," before crushing a device that called down a helicopter he'd had hidden in the mountains the whole time. 2 moles, one on the island, one in the clan city, both wearing the Wu name, both planted quietly to grow into something months from now. Somebody was seeding my province while I was busy burning their bases. Not on my watch. Alfred flagged the helicopter the second it cleared the ridge, and I told him one word, alive. So a turret outside my shelter fired a box into the sky. The box unfolded into Alfred's own armored suit mid-fall, and he lit every thruster he had and crossed the distance to Shan City at dozens of times the speed of sound, while the imposter was still dragging the old man toward his getaway, grinning up at the sound of rotors, certain he'd made it out clean. He had exactly 3 minutes to enjoy that feeling. The old patriarch, held at the man's side, watched his panic and put it together out loud. "You're terrified of the force that wiped out God's descent, aren't you?" Yes. Yes, he was. And it was already in the sky over his head. The helicopter emptied its entire arsenal into Alfred on the way down. Heavy guns, a couple dozen missiles, and it all splashed off his shield like rain off a windshield. He rammed the chopper, walked out of the fireball without a scratch on the paint, and when the mole put a knife to the old man's throat and screamed the usual threat, Alfred answered in his pleasant butler voice that by his math, even if the hostage died, catching the mole still came out ahead. Then he took the man before he could kill himself to resurrect. One nano hand clamped over the enemy's own blade mid-plunge, patched him up just enough to keep him breathing, and flew him home. Alive. That was the whole order. Because a live God's Descent agent who was busy seeding my province is worth infinitely more to me answering questions than dead. And the old patriarch, watching an Iron Man he couldn't have imagined a week ago casually out-tech a god, made the only smart choice left to a proud man in a changed world. He asked to join me. Shout Spark 3 times in an open field, I'll answer. His clan of tens of thousands, the oldest name in Shan City, folded into my shelter because he finally understood that in this apocalypse, clan pride is worth exactly 1 bottle of clean water, and I had the water. But the mole told me something worse than I expected. Because Dr. Chin, the scientist on the island, turned out to be the last surviving Wu of that same Shan City clan, except the real Wu family hadn't survived at all. Over the last decade they'd been quietly dying off, hundreds a year, unexplained, starting the same year the real Dr. Chin left for university and never came back. Somebody wearing that man's name had been thinning out his own bloodline for 10 years so that no relative would ever be left alive to say, that's not him. Which meant the thing sitting at the heart of Dragon Vein Island, with full access to Old He's surveillance, next to the one intact Dragon Vein in the country, was not a scientist. It was a God's Descent operation a decade in the making, and my one Alfred clone in that vault was stranded, cut off by the island's isolation, unable to phone home across all that ocean until it could hitch a ride to the mainland. I had a spy inside the enemy, and no way to hear him yet, and right on cue, a half-drowned blonde foreigner washed up in Old He's waters, in a sealed zone nobody should be able to reach, beaten near to death, fished out, and nursed back to life by people who had no idea what they'd just brought inside. I'll let you sit with who that might be. Meanwhile, I finally told my own people what the sign-in system had really handed me. I gathered Han Yue, Mother Fang, Ma Lei, everyone who mattered, and they filed in braced for a funeral. Because I never call meetings, Alfred just sends orders. Instead, I put a model on the table the size of a city. 3 planetary shelters, merged by space folding into one stellar-level shelter, 120 floors, each one 1,600 square kilometers, its own arsenals building 100-meter mechs, folded down until a thing the size of a city fits in a footprint you'd never notice. Laid across Hai City, Qing City, and Hu City in a triangle, the most stable shape there is, facing the sea the Zerg would crawl out of. Mother Fang asked why, when the 2 shelters we had were already centuries ahead of anyone on Earth. Because centuries ahead isn't enough for what's coming, and I've seen the ending of this game. Build time, 48 hours, everyone indoors, no wandering while the space folds. Han Yue quietly asked Mother Fang if I'd finally lost my mind. Mother Fang, who'd watched me open a second city-sized shelter without telling a soul, just patted her hand and said, "Trust him. What if he really can?" I could. I had 1 planetary shelter in hand from the island vein, 2 more homes to fold in, and a very short calendar. 1 month to the cold, 4 to the swarm, and a mass wedding I didn't know yet I was about to throw. First, I closed the Shan City deal, and I did it the way you tame something big and proud. Soft hand, hard hand, both in one meal. I fed the clan elders a beautiful lunch, told them plainly I'd considered wiping them out, and decided vassalage was less paperwork, and then set a box of capsules on the table. Nanobots. Swallow it, and we're partners. Betray me, and one command ends you. I showed them exactly what betrayal looks like on a screen, so they'd never need to see it in person. gave them 60 seconds, and the old patriarch, sharp to the end, swallowed first so his people would follow. Then their stomachs turned over, and they all folded up in pain, convinced I'd killed them anyway, and one old man wheezed that at least he'd left an heir at home. It was a sedative, just a sedative, to walk them calmly into processing. I don't poison partners. I just like them to remember, in their gut, who holds the button. With the clan folded in, Alfred lit up the network across the whole province. Every dead phone that could still charge suddenly had a signal, and, mysteriously, a Kindling forum app already installed, full of photos of my people eating hot meals in clean rooms, while the rest of the province chewed bark. You want to conquer a region without firing a shot? Show the starving the pictures of the Fed. A patrol kid got his signal back mid-shift and called a girl he thought he'd lost, both of them crying that it wasn't a dream, and swearing by the indestructible phone brand he'd been using to cave in zombie skulls. That's the war I was actually winning. Not the one with lasers, the one with dinner. Then, at midnight, I folded 3 city-sized shelters into one. Everybody home, doors sealed, 48 hours, small earthquakes rolling through 3 cities, while space itself got tucked into a smaller footprint. Han Yue fed me potato chips on the couch and asked if I was nervous. I wasn't. I'd seen the ending. But out on Dragon Vein Island, the ending was rewriting itself, and it started with the blonde man they'd fished half dead out of the sea, waking up in a cell, and introducing himself as Godstone. Yes, that stone. The god who ran off Helena's boat. He'd fled straight into a worse week than mine, reported his failure, got stripped of his godhood by the God King, and got handed a demotion errand. Go to where the meteorite fell in the Pacific, and chip some pieces off it. The same meteorite that carried the zombie plague into our world. So Stone suited up, dove 1,000 meters, and found the thing on the seabed, guarded. Not by soldiers, by the ocean. Half-meter sardines, crabs 3 and 10 meters wide, schools of mutated fish arranged around it like a wall, and gliding through all of it a whale the length of a football field. His team didn't make it off that seabed. Stone only escaped because a god who's activated a 3rd-tier gene lock swims very fast and doesn't stop to help, and even he got swallowed whole by the whale and woke up spat out on Old He's shore, which tells you the real horror I'd only guessed at. The cold's coming, yes. The swarm's coming, yes. But the sea itself had already turned, and Dragon Vein Island is a rock surrounded on all sides by exactly that sea. Old He put the whole island on lockdown, doubled the ocean probes, grounded every ship, and tried desperately to reach me, and couldn't, because my shelters were mid-fold and I was off the grid. So the one man who could have helped was, for 48 critical hours, a dead phone. And Stone? Stone, deposed god, sole survivor of a meteorite that eats gods, sitting in a busted open prison cell he could have walked out of any time, because he tore the unbreakable bars like wet cardboard and then climbed back in, asked his captors for one thing. Not freedom, not a weapon, fried chicken and a beer. The most feared being in the province defected to the good guys' side for a bucket of fried chicken, and somewhere the ocean couldn't reach him. He also, quietly, filed the idea away that all those sea monsters might make a lovely weapon against the one shelter that ruined his life. A god will switch teams for chicken. He won't stop scheming while he chews. And this is the part that still gets me, because it happened while I was sealed inside a folding shelter, deaf and blind for 2 days, unable to lift a finger. The sea stone warned about didn't wait for me. It came for High City on the 2nd morning of the merge, and my people had to hold the beach without me. It started so gently. Old Gao, a fisherman in his 50s, who'd finally earned his wife's blessing by feeding the family off the water, cast his line with 40 other old-timers on the shore. Then every rod on the beach bent at once. Big hits, impossible pulls, 3 men to a line. And Old Gao, decades on that water, felt the wrongness of it before he understood it, and screamed at everyone to cut their lines, the water's dirty, and cut his own first. Half of them listened, half of them stayed, because it's the apocalypse and a big fish is dinner and you don't leave dinner on a hunch. Old Gao went home to noodles and wild herbs and a wife who, for once, didn't scold him, just thanked him for coming back. The ones who stayed found out what was under the water at dusk. Crabs 3 and 10 meters across. Octopuses wearing crab claws like weapons. Meter-tall seahorses walking upright. The whole ocean, Stone described, climbing out onto the sand toward a few dozen old men with fishing poles. Some of them didn't make it off that beach. And then, this is the part the whole province ended up watching on their phones. 100,000-strong zombie horde came pouring down toward the shore. The fishermen thought they were finished twice over, except the zombies ran straight past them, into the sea things. A zombie in a too-small suit, standing weirdly upright, waved the humans back and parted the horde to let them walk out alive, and then turned and threw his ruined body at the tide with the rest. Because Han Yue's dead had one order carved into whatever was left of their heads: protect this land. And they did not know how to retreat. They knew how to bite until there was nothing left to bite with. The forum lost its mind. Some people weeping that even as corpses they'd die for the shoreline, some sneering that they were just mindless things chasing seafood. Then a kid uploaded the video of the suited zombie letting the old men go, and the sneering stopped. And something happened that no speech of mine ever managed. People started driving to High City. From Qing City, from Yun City, from every place I'd freed. Regular survivors with hunting rifles, screaming into their phones that they refused to be worse than a zombie at defending their own coast. Joe Kai showed up first with 200 fighters and a machine gun bigger than he was, showing off until his butler quietly reminded him they were burning through ammo. At which point he cleared his throat and announced that actually we're all one family. Sun Jing rolled in with a missile truck she'd bought off me as a little trinket, found the sea thing's nest with a drone, and put 10 missiles down the hole. The tide broke. The beach went quiet. Tens of thousands of Chinese who'd raced across a province to defend a coastline they didn't live on stood around grinning, disappointed they'd missed the fight. They hadn't missed it. They'd seen the trailer. Because out past the shallows, something answered the zombies' roar. 10 meters tall and still growing, stitched together out of a dozen different sea things, armored where it counted, and hungry everywhere else. Bullets vanished into it. Rockets annoyed it. And when Sun Jing put her last 2 missiles into it, the missiles that had just flattened the nest, it soaked them up and got bigger. That's the horror of the thing. You couldn't kill it with force, because force was food. It threw back its head and howled, and the whole ocean stood up behind it, a second tide bigger than the first, and my people finally understood they were out of tricks. No more missiles, no me, night falling, and a monster that ate everything they threw at it, and that's when the zombies started to howl at the moon. All of them at once, the whole ruined horde, faces turned up to the pale gray light over High City, calling, not in fear, calling for someone, summoning. Somewhere back in the dark of the city, one voice answered them, one roar that shook every window in High City, and stood the hair up on tens of thousands of necks at once. The dead weren't making a last stand, they were calling their queen, and she sent her champion. He walked out of the dark of High City 4 meters tall, pale as bone, a 6-meter sword in his fist, and a familiar silver ring on his hand. Han Yue's great general, the one she'd trained herself, wearing my tech. He didn't hurry. He walked up to a 10-meter kaiju, took its arm off with one cut, caught its next punch bare-handed hard enough to knock 100 people flat with the wind of it, leapt onto its skull and came down through it, and walked into the city while the monster fell apart behind him. Tens of thousands of people who'd raced across a province to fight stood there and watched one dead swordsman do what all their missiles couldn't. And then the sea sent 5 more, each bigger than the first. This time cutting didn't work. He carved them into pieces, and the pieces got back up and drove him into the sand with fists the size of sharks, 10 at a time, pounding him a meter deep. If he'd needed to breathe, he'd have died 6 times over. And here's the thing that I keep coming back to. Sitting sealed in my folding shelter, with no idea any of this was happening. The humans didn't run. Sun Xiong walked his family shelter straight into the line to buy the general a gap. Sun Jing, the missile truck woman, sharp as a scalpel, didn't fire her last rockets at the monsters, because she'd learned that only fed them. She fired them beside the monsters, and the shockwave staggered them just long enough for the general to rip one off its feet and claw his way back to shore. Regular survivors with dead guns beat at the tide with rifle stocks like fire pokers. Some of them didn't come home. That's the war nobody films the sequel to. The general got his second wind, pulled a second 7-meter sword out of that silver ring, and cut a monster into pieces too small to reassemble. But every swing was landing softer than the last, and the 4 that were left called up a fresh tide, and the man was slowing, and there were no more missiles, and no me, and the night just kept getting deeper. And then the land itself woke up. Because under my orphanage in Qing City, the broken dragon vein I'd been healing city by city finally knit its last inch closed, and the whole province felt it. Magnitude 7 quake rolled through Qing City. Orange-red thunderheads boiled up over all 6 cities at once, something glowing and enormous turning slow inside them. And every soul in M province walked outside and looked up at a sky that had never done this before. Out past the High City shore, from under the water, the biggest thing yet answered. A leviathan that threw a column of water higher than the tallest tower in the city, 300 meters straight up and clean through the clouds, roaring what sounded for all the world like a challenge screamed at heaven itself. Heaven answered. Orange-red lightning came down out of those clouds and walked across 3 nautical miles of ocean in an instant. Every mutated sea thing in the water lit up and died floating. The 4 kaiju burying the general seized and smoked and howled. The lightning crawled over the beach and over the general and over every exhausted human standing on that sand, and it didn't burn a single one of them. It wrapped around thousands of Chinese people and their dead defenders like it knew exactly whose side it was on, because it did. The land had decided who belonged to it. The sea's monsters were not on the list. That's the thing the whole story had been quietly building to. Not my mechs, not Han Yue's corpses. The oldest thing in the country, The dragon vein I'd spent an entire war stitching back together, one liberated city at a time, standing up at last and pointing its lightning at the invaders, while sparing every last person who'd refused to abandon the coast. Every Chinese is a dragon. That stopped being a slogan the night the sky picked a side. And at the exact moment the lightning fell, 48 hours to the second after it began, my shelter finished folding. Alfred's voice came over the intercom, cheerful as a hotel front desk. Upgrade complete, the doors are open. Feel free to step outside and stretch your legs. I peeled myself off Han Yue, rubbed a back that a second-order gene lock still couldn't protect from my own wife, checked the clock, and saw the 50-minute mark. Somewhere out on a beach I'd left undefended. My people had been bleeding all night to hold a line for me. I'd been asleep on a couch eating potato chips, while a dead general and a living dragon covered my absence. Time to go to work. The landlord was back, and the sea was about to get an eviction notice. The doors opened on a different world. My people walked out of their dormitory rooms into what looked like a forest under an open sky, a plaza with birdsong and blooming flowers, a miniature sun hung under the ceiling that was warm and bright enough that grown adults stood and cried at the sight of it, because they hadn't seen the sun in months and their bodies had started to forget it. A stellar shelter doesn't just house you, it gives you back the sky. Alfred introduced his new staff while he was at it. A resident steward AI named Nexus, and a couple of combat AIs, Aura and Oracle. Even my butler had middle management now. Then I skipped the pleasantries and put my army on the beach the fast way. No runways, no flight time. The new teleport had no rules anymore. 100 helicopters and both 12-meter mechs just blinked out of a sealed second floor and reappeared over the high city coast in a flash of blue light. My guard cracked out laser rifles and cleared the beach of every sea thing in about 4 minutes flat, which the exhausted survivors who'd bled all night to hold that same sand watched with the specific heartbreak of people learning the professionals had arrived. Sun Xiong and Sun Jing, who'd been so proud of their missile truck, just smiled and put it away. Grandpa's still grandpa. But clearing the beach wasn't the problem. My nanobots, 100,000 microscopic cameras per shell, went into the water to find the end of the tide, and there wasn't one. 800 meters deep, as far as they could see in every direction, the ocean was a solid packed wall of mutated fish with no visible edge. We weren't fighting an invasion, we were fighting the sea, and the sea had a general. A whale 220 meters long, bigger than a downtown tower laid on its side, big enough that our instruments had never even registered it because nothing that size was supposed to exist. It surfaced screaming, and that scream did something no weapon had. It reached into my guards' heads. 100 of my hardest soldiers, men who'd wiped out armies without blinking, went slack-eyed and gentle and started weeping that the poor thing was so sad, so beautiful, please don't hurt it. Some of them begged me to kill them instead of it. My combat AI Oracle had to physically strap every one of them into their helicopter seats, because 100 cutting-edge gunships in mind-controlled hands could flatten a city, and the whale knew it. That's the real horror of the thing. It didn't need to beat my army, it just needed to borrow it. So I plugged everyone's ears who wasn't already lost, handed the triggers to the AIs, and looked hard at the whale on the scan. And there they were. Thin orange-red lines threaded all through its 200-meter body, deep into its organs. Lightning scars. This was the Leviathan the reconnected dragon vein had struck out of the sky, and it had survived a bolt that killed everything else in 3 nautical miles. In the genre I grew up reading, that's not a wound, that's a heavenly tribulation, and this whale had walked out of one still breathing. Alfred put it plainly. The lightning had cooked it down to half strength and left a deep seam through its body, and if I put everything I had into that exact seam, I had an 80% shot at killing it. 80% I'll take. But I wasn't just going to kill it. That mind control scream was the most valuable thing in the ocean, because it explained everything. The whale hadn't herded the whole sea ashore by accident, it had called them the way Han Yue calls corpses. If I could record that frequency, copy it, bend it, I wouldn't just end this fight, I'd own the ocean. And an ocean is 70% of a planet with a bug invasion 4 months out. So while my missiles locked onto the whale's lightning seam, Alfred quietly started taping its voice. Because the plan was never only to win the night. The plan was to take the sea's throat and keep it. And if the bombing failed, well, I still had a leftover from an earlier job that would settle it for certain, at the small cost of making High City uninhabitable for a while. I really hoped I wouldn't have to open that box. I didn't have to. We poured everything down the whale's lightning seam, wave after wave of missiles into the one wound heaven had already opened, and the 80% held. The screaming stopped. The sea went still. My 100 mind-controlled soldiers slumped in their harnesses and woke up with splitting headaches and no memory of weeping for a monster, staring at the scratch marks their own hands had left on the straps that saved their lives. The whole ocean, leaderless, turned around and went home. We even dragged the thing ashore to look at it. 220 meters of dead Leviathan on my beach, the forum adding +1 for 100 straight posts. I filed the recording of its call away like a loaded gun. That fight was won. And then the sky told me the fight had never been the point. The orange-red lightning came back, and this time Alfred, a machine built by a civilization centuries ahead of Earth, told me he had no data on it. None. It had never happened in recorded history. Only in one unofficial scrap from 600 years ago, an old man's deathbed note about a night the heavens turned to fire, and everyone who witnessed it died, silenced. And now it was over every city in the province at once, and Alfred ran the numbers and told me flatly that there was no hiding from it. Not a kilometer underground, not inside a folded shelter. Everyone was going to die. After the zombies, after the gods, after the sea. Killed by the weather. So I did the only honest thing left. I teleported out onto a rooftop with Han Yue, put my arm around her, and we stood there to watch the end together. Let the people sleep through it. It's rude to wake someone that late just to tell them it's over. The clouds broke, and they weren't clouds. They were dragons. 1,000-meter thunder dragons, one over every city, turning their enormous heads and searching the ground for something. And behind us, in the smoke of an explosion I hadn't caused, a small figure walked out wrapped in that same orange-red light, and said the thing that broke Han Yue in half. Didn't we agree to find husbands together? How'd you find one first? Clara, our girl. The daughter Han Yue had given up her old life to bring back, asleep in a conversion tank for months, while I fought a war around her, awake, whole, human again, and cracking jokes at her nominal father, inside of 30 seconds. Han Yue covered her mouth and cried the way you only cry when a thing you'd stopped letting yourself hope for walks back into the room. And I stood there with a wife I'd married in a trade and a daughter I'd promised to save, on a rooftop under the end of the world, and understood that this, not the mechs, not the province, was the thing I'd actually been building toward the whole time. Except Clara wasn't just awake. Clara was who the dragons were looking for, because those weren't storm dragons. They were the spirits of the dragon veins I'd spent a war stitching back together, and Clara was the dragon maiden. And one after another they bowed their 1,000-meter heads and poured themselves into her. And every time one did, the orange-red light washed out over a whole city. And everyone it touched got stronger. I broke clean through into a 4th-tier gene lock standing still. Han Yue jumped to the 5th. My androids climbed a full tier apiece. Even the zombies on the beach lit up from the inside and rose a rank. The heavenly punishment that was going to end us all turned out to be a gift, delivered by a little girl in a dragon-patterned dress, one city at a time. So I teleported her from rooftop to rooftop across the province, High City, Qing City, all 6, and let her free every dragon spirit and level up an entire population in a single night. Best apocalypse ending I've ever heard of. But nothing beautiful in this world goes unwatched. Far off on Dragon Vein Island, the fake Dr. Chin felt his dragon vein flicker awake and go dark, and did the math I was too happy to do. The vein went quiet because the dragon maiden had appeared and taken its spirit into herself. He called his master, a god who answered by threatening to nuke the island for waking him early, and reported it. The dragon maiden is real, she's in the world, and the god king has wanted her for a very, very long time. New orders. Drop the disguise, mobilize everything, hunt her down. Wu straightened his back, smiled his crooked smile at the silent stone, and said out loud, to no one, that he was done pretending. He was God's descent, and the quiet was over. So that's the bill that came due with the miracle. I got my daughter back and leveled up a province in one night. And in the same night, the most powerful thing in the universe learned her name, and sent everything it had to come take her from me. I just didn't know it yet. I was still on a rooftop in Shan City, watching Clara reach up for the last dragon in the sky, thinking we'd won. She took the 6th one in and dropped, drained white, back into a coma in Han Yue's arms. And Han Yue looked at me with that same old terror. Not again. Please, not a 3rd time. I told her the truth. Clara had just become the most important person in the whole province, and I'd spend everything I had keeping her safe and boring and alive. Han Yue didn't want a goddess. She wanted her daughter breathing next to her. Same thing I wanted. Then the ground opened its mouth. A magnitude 5 quake rolled out from under Qing City, out of the exact spot where I'd found the broken dragon vein on day 1, and something ancient and enormous came up out of it into the dawn sky. Not a thunder dragon, their grandfather. An azure dragon the size of the whole province, head over Qing City and tail over Shan City, so vast that people in 6 different cities each photographed a different piece of it, and only understood when they laid the photos over a map and the pieces made a dragon. It spoke to every soul in M province at once. My name is Aohai, born in ancient times, buried in the Ming, and now reborn. My dragon breath lights the mountains and the rivers. It looked a long time at the sleeping girl in Han Yue's arms, named her its chosen one. Protect her, and the land's dragon breath thrives. Lose her, and it's gone forever. Roared one last time that shoved every living body in the province up another rank, and dissolved into a wisp of green smoke that sank back under Qing City, into the vein I'd spent a whole war healing. The oldest thing in China had woken up because a bullied kid in a rented room decided to save one city, then couldn't stop. And on the far side of the country, someone tried to steal the girl before she'd even opened her eyes. Dr. Keen, the island mole, dropped his mask the same night and moved on Old He, cut down a row of defenders, called in hidden missiles that turned the helicopters I'd left Old He into scrap, and stood there gloating that the old man had no way left to protect anyone. Then he emptied 100 rifles into Old He at once. And Old He didn't fall, because months ago I'd pressed a nano ring onto his finger and made him wear it despite his eye rolling, and the second his life was truly in danger, the little AI inside it threw up a shield and pinged me. He stood in a hurricane of bullets like a man leaning into rain, keeping his 2 granddaughters alive behind him, Lin Qiang, and the one who came out of the sky to help, Manhwa, of the Yuan family, one of the 4 ancient houses of China. Her fighter jets and her carrier turned Wu's army into nothing in about a minute. And here's who I actually sent. Not me, I had a province mid-miracle. I sent Alfred, in his own body, because I'd built my butler a suit of his own, an empty cord armor, no human inside. When Old He's ring lit up, Alfred crossed the sea at Mach 6. He blew past Guan Yuan's carrier group, Hua's father, the border war god who once held 3,000 invaders alone. He outran their newest fighter jets without firing a shot, and he set down on Dragon Island to a beach full of people staring at a talking suit of armor with nobody inside it. Even the ancient families weren't ready for that one. And then Alfred, being Alfred, mildly noted that his scan showed the island wasn't actually clear, walked to a pile of reef the search team had skipped because it looked like garbage, and blew it open. Dr. Chin was still in there, arm and all, waiting for nightfall to try again. Alfred took the arm off and pinned him. The mole a decade in the making, caught by the one guest at the party who could see through walls. So, in a single night I got my daughter back, leveled a whole province, woke a dragon older than the dynasties and, through a ring I'd forced on a stubborn old man and a butler I'd given a body to, saved the last person alive who'd ever paid my way, on an island 1,000 kilometers from home that I never once set foot on. That's the kind of reach a stellar shelter buys you. And it's the kind of reach that makes the god king of an interstellar death cult decide he wants your daughter, and everything you've built, for himself. But that bill comes later. For one morning, standing in the light of a dragon over 6 cities, I let myself believe the hard part was behind me. It was, of course, just intermission. Alfred brought both gods home in chains, Wu, and Stone too, because Stone, who defected to Old He's side for fried chicken, walked up to my butler on that beach, with his hand out like an old friend, and Alfred put an orange-red shockwave through his chest, and told him flatly that quitting God's descent doesn't erase what he did to a whole province. Others forget. Kindling Shelter keeps a ledger. Old He didn't argue, he'd just learned exactly what Stone had done to M Province, and handed him over without blinking. So my butler flew 2 gods across the sea at Mach 4, one arm gone, and hung them in my basement to answer questions. I don't work prisoners over for sport. I just make very sure a being that can resurrect itself doesn't get the chance. And then the part of the world I'd been ignoring finally noticed me back. Because Old He's other granddaughter, Guanhua, of one of the 4 ancient houses of China, reported home about the flying suit of armor, and her father came sniffing, Guanyuan, a genuine war god, the man who once held off 3,000 foreign soldiers alone at the border and sent the survivors home too broken to fight. He decided he'd like one of my suits. For free, and if I wouldn't hand it over, he'd come cut down whoever ran the shelter, which would have worried me more if I hadn't spent an entire war quietly standing on the shoulders of the oldest woman in my orphanage. Because Mother Fang, the woman who raised me in a burned-out orphanage, who I'd thought of as a poor old cook, is Fang Ru, eldest princess of the Xuan Yuan family, the house that outranks the Yuan. One phone call from her, and the Yuan matriarch, 90 years old, 99 dishes on a golden table, went pale. Because Mother Fang's terms were simple. Either your golden grandson faces my boy, or the resources that keep your declining house alive get cut in half. That's the weight I'd been carrying without knowing it. The reason I took a whole province off God's descent, and no government official ever came to seize it out from under me, wasn't luck. It was one old woman making one call, and the whole thing rippled straight to the top. In Beijing, the paramount old man of the country, a grandfather stealing braised pork off his grandkids' plates and teaching them, between bites, never to reach for a gift until everything already yours is safe, because there's no such thing as a kindness with no hook in it. Read the file on me over breakfast. He knew He Tao, my old He, had vouched for me. He knew I'd cleared God's descent out of M Province and saved him the trouble of doing it himself, so he made the coldest, smartest call a leader can make. Let the arrogant war god go test the orphan, and see which wolf eats which. If I win, the Yuan house gets humbled, and a useful new force proves itself. If I lose, he's got a clean excuse to bring the Yuan to heel. Either way, the throne wins. I'd become a piece worth playing on a board I'd never even seen. That's what a stellar shelter and a liberated province buy you. A seat at a game where the other players have been seated for centuries. But the real prize the dragon left behind wasn't politics. It was this. Clara, awake and bossy, explained what Ao Hai meant. As long as the Dragon Maiden lives, the land's dragon breath flows, and dragon breath is the oldest, cleanest way there is to unlock a gene lock. No zombie crystals needed. The same force that let ancient warriors cut down 100 men each before the veins were ever severed. She'd just handed an entire province the ability to grow strong for free, and she'd handed my family something quieter and bigger. Dragon breath stretches a life for centuries. Han Yue, my zombie queen who'd traded her old existence for a daughter, sat on the couch eating chips and learning she and Clara would have hundreds of years together. She held the kid and murmured that it was wonderful. It was the first time since I'd met her that Han Yue talked about the future, like it was a place she'd actually get to live in. So the cold could come. Let it. I had a province full of newly awakened fighters, a dragon under my city, a princess for a foster mother, and a family that was finally going to get old together. I almost felt ready. Almost. The winter had other ideas. But before the first snow fell, the ancient families came to see what I was made of and got their answer from a fisherman. Guan Yuan jumped off his carrier onto my beach, looked around for someone important, and found old Gao, the same old man who'd smelled the sea going wrong that first night, mending a fishing line. His goon put a hand on the old man's shoulder and made a threat, and old Gao, who'd been standing in the orange-red dragon light like everyone else in High City, broke the man's arm without looking up from his tackle. That's the thing nobody outside understood yet. I hadn't leveled up an army. I'd leveled up a whole city. My weakest retiree could now crush a war god's elite guard's pistol into scrap in one hand and go back to fishing. Guan Yuan came looking for the tiger and got mauled by the grass. Then my Captain Ma Lei showed up, an ex-king of soldiers, 3rd tier now, and folded the 2nd tier war god like a lawn chair, one hand around both his wrists, before Guan Yuan even understood he'd been moved. And that would have been the end of it, except the whole thing was a trap inside a trap. Because 2 more of the 4 ancient houses, the Ying and the Di, had sent men riding in behind Guan Yuan with orders to kill him in the chaos and pin it on my Xuan Yuan foster mother. The wolf eats wolf game the old man in Beijing had set in motion. When my people wouldn't get out of the way, these geniuses did the one thing you never do near me. They pointed a fighter jet's missile at a beach full of my fishing retirees. So I sent my 3 AIs. Not my guard, my butlers. Alfred, Oracle, and Nexus, each in his own suit, crossed the sky faster than the fighter jets and took the whole air wing apart in under a minute, and the missile aimed at my civilians got its instructions rewritten mid-flight and blew up the attacker's own frigate instead. Then Alfred walked into the enemy carrier's control room, quietly informed the man there that he'd already reset the ship's weapons systems some minutes ago so none of his launch buttons did anything, and carried him off. Every attacker from 3 ancient families, captured or dead, not one escaped. In a single afternoon, 3 of the oldest houses in China learned the same lesson God's Descent had. The reach doesn't come from the man out front, it comes from the thing in the walls. And the best part, the part that changed everything for me, is that the whole fight was being filmed. 2 government jets sat in the clouds recording it for a conference room in Beijing, where the paramount old man and his generals watched 3 ancient families get erased by 3 empty suits of armor, and made their decision about me. Not to seize me, not to absorb me. To leave me alone and let me grow, because I'd taken a province off an interstellar death cult and saved them the trouble, and a thing that useful is worth more running free than in a cage. Alfred lifted every one of their voice prints off the recording, so I even knew exactly which titans had just quietly blessed me. After a whole war of stepping carefully so no official would come take what I'd built, I finally had the one backing that mattered. The top of the country had looked at the orphan with the flying armor and decided he was theirs to keep, not to break. So there it was. God's Descent broken, the sea beaten back, a dragon under my city, the ancient families humbled, Beijing in my corner, and my family about to live for centuries. I had run the whole table. There was exactly one thing left on the calendar that I couldn't out-tech, out-scheme, or out-punch. The cold. And it came down like the sky had finally run out of patience with all of us. But the cold gave me exactly one warning breath. And then, because the universe has a sense of timing, the Yuan family's stupidity opened a second front before the first real snow landed. Because Guan Yuan's grandmother, 90 years old and out of options, did the single most unforgivable thing a great house can do. To buy back one grandson who literally cannot die, she yanked 3,000 elite soldiers off the N province border and sent them flying to High City, left the whole northern frontier held by 100 men, and the warlords camped across that border, a horde out of a starving neighbor state, the kind that runs on kill everything, burn everything, take everything, saw the guards leave and poured in through the gap. That's the part that stopped being about mechs for a while. Because the 100 defenders who stayed ran to the survivor camp behind them, and begged for help. Anyone who could hold a gun. And most of the survivors said no. Said it's your job to protect us. Said we paid our taxes. Said what's it to me? A young soldier named Xiao Hu stood in front of thousands of able-bodied people and watched them look at the ground, and learned in one afternoon what human nature actually looks like when the wall's coming down. And then, this is the part I make myself remember, a handful of old veterans picked up their bags anyway, over their own families crying, and said an old man can serve his country the same as a young one. A few hundred out of thousands. 20 of them didn't come back. They didn't have to go at all. They went anyway. The border commander lined up his last 80 and told them plainly that their fathers had held this line for decades and their generation was going to fail it. So the only thing left was to sell their lives dear and buy the escapees a few more minutes. And behind all of it, pulling the string, a blonde foreigner who walked into the warlord's tent, snapped his fingers, and shut down the entire border base's technology from the inside, sealing the weapons in their own armory, dropping the helicopters out of the sky, and then vanished before anyone could ask his name. God's descent again. The cult that seeded the plague was now quietly handing my country's door to whoever would kick it in, so Beijing called me, because Beijing had no one else fast enough. The old man swallowed his pride and asked the orphan to save the frontier, and I named my price. Crystals for prisoners, 1 million for Guanyan himself, and then I did the thing that ends arguments. I sent my 3 AIs ahead at 6 times the speed of sound, and behind them I launched the classic of mountains and seas. I'd been saving that one. A 10-meter war platform that takes off like a missile and hits like a weather event, the thing you break out when a lesson needs to be permanent. Alfred, Oracle, and Nexus came down over that border first, walked into a survivor camp mid-atrocity, and ended every invader in it before they could finish what they'd started, put themselves between the horde and the civilians, and held. Then Alfred lifted into the tens of thousands still pouring across the line, and the classic of mountains and seas came down out of the sun behind him, and the border stopped being a battle. It became a demonstration. The defenders who'd been sawing enemies down one dulled blade at a time watched a single bombardment clear whole fields of them at once. The warlord who'd been so certain 100 tired men couldn't hold, looked up at a machine from a civilization his had never dreamed of and understood, far too late, exactly whose country he'd wandered into. I didn't do it to be kind to the survivors who refused to fight. I did it because that's the whole point of a border. You make the price of crossing it so obviously insane that no starving warlord ever does the math and comes back. Strike once so you never strike 100 times. Build the new frontier out of the wreckage of the people who tested the old one. The old veterans who volunteered, I made sure got their names written down and their families fed for good. The thousands who sat in their tents and gambled that monsters would be reasonable, the ones still breathing learned exactly how that gamble pays. I couldn't save them from that lesson. Nobody can. All I could do was make sure there was still a country standing when it was over. And then, with the border sealed and my machines still cooling in the first flurries, the actual winter arrived. The one no wall keeps out. But that border handed me 2 more images first, and I've never been able to put them down. The first was how it ended. Alfred linked to the classic of mountains and seas, conjured a 5-meter cannon out of it, and dropped a single blue sphere into the middle of the invading army that simply unmade everyone it touched. No bodies, no craters full of the dead, just a crater. The survivors knelt and screamed about prisoner rights and international treaty, and Alfred played them his answer in 4 languages so every man understood it. You don't survive my mercy, you only die under my attack. He finished the army, hung the 3 warlords' heads on the border, and left them there as a sign, because a frontier only works when the price of crossing it is legend. Cruel? Maybe. But the men on the other side of that line had walked in to do unspeakable things to my people the moment the door cracked, and I will spend cruelty like water before I let that door swing open twice. The second image was who took the border afterward. 2 more of the ancient houses, the Ying and the Di, flew in on Beijing's orders to relieve the disgraced Yuan, and promptly refused to let Alfred install a real defensive AI, because their own housebrand systems were surely better. They weren't. Alfred found the sabotage in seconds. Their 2 dragon AIs scanned for half an hour, found nothing, missed everything, and squabbled over which of them was a 1/10 of a millisecond faster, while the actual hole God's descent had cut sat wide open behind them. They called Alfred's body a remote-controlled toy, and sent him home. The border guards watched their competent guardian leave and their incompetent aristocrats stay, and understood exactly how much trouble the country was still in. That's the forward the whole episode kept whispering. God's descent's real weapon isn't God's. It's that their machine minds can switch off a nation's guns from another dimension, and Earth has nothing that can stop it, except one butler who wasn't born here. And on the flight home, the 3rd image, the one I actually keep. My AIs found 100-odd survivors, some of the same people who'd fled the border rather than fight, trapped on a rooftop by zombies, tearing each other apart under the pressure the way frightened people do, one of them locking the rest out to die because the world had already taken everything from him. My machines pried the door off, cleared the horde, and carried the survivors home to a shelter most of them didn't deserve and all of them needed. I let them in anyway. Because here's the thing I finally understood, standing over that whole ledger of cowardice and courage. The veterans who volunteered and the survivors who hid are the same species, and a home worth building has to have room for both. The ones who run toward the fire, and the ones who only learn what it's for once it's at their door. So I banked all 3 lessons, and turned to face the only enemy that doesn't kneel, doesn't scheme, and can't be shot. The cold came down over 6 cities like a lid closing on a jar. I'd been handing out cotton coats and heaters across the whole province since late April, in 25-degree spring heat, and people took them because free is free, and laughed at me for it. On May 4th, the temperature fell off a cliff. Teens at midnight, 30 below by dawn, then 40 below, the seas itself freezing solid under a sun that had stopped giving heat. Across the rest of the world, leaders stood in warm rooms and watched their people freeze because there was nothing to be done. In my province, my residents woke up warm, complained that my weather AI must be broken because surely it isn't -30 in May, and then watched the scavengers come in caked in frost and went very quiet. 80% of everyone in M province who wasn't in my coats or hadn't unlocked a gene lock died in the first nights. My people fished through holes in the ice in weather that would kill a man in minutes, warm as spring, and blessed the shelter that had laughed at them into taking the coats. That's the whole thesis of the thing. You don't win the apocalypse by being strong. You win it by being the one who saw the winter coming while everyone else was enjoying the spring. I collected on the Yuan family while I was at it. 7 million zombie crystals, which is 7 million dead zombies dug out one skull at a time, a debt so obscene that even the old man in Beijing went quiet when I named it. He gave me the leverage to demand it and an unrestricted pass to move anywhere in China, on the theory that you trust the people you employ or you don't employ them. The UN still owe me that mountain. I intend to collect it in full someday, but that's a story for a colder winter than this one. And while I was gloating about the cold, 3 things I couldn't see were moving in it. The first was that the sea old he had warned me about was filling with things a kilometer wide, drifting up from a deep that the approaching swarm was emptying. The second was 3 more gods, one in each neighboring province, one of them wearing the shape of a homesick little girl, sitting in a video call and deciding to wait out my winter, because the cold would reveal exactly which of my people were being nourished by the dragon, and the dragon leads to the dragon maiden. And the God King has wanted my daughter for longer than I've been alive. They wept together on that call, 3 monsters missing their mother's cooking and their wives and their brothers, wanting nothing but to finish the job and go home. That's the part that stuck with me. The things coming for Clara weren't evil for its own sake. They were homesick, which makes them so much worse, because a homesick army never quits. The third thing crawled out of a fish. Old Gao, my lucky fisherman, pulled a 400-pound grouper out of the ice, the biggest catch of his life. And when they cut it open, there was a beetle inside it the color of jade, bright green in a frozen white world. He photographed it and tagged my forum instead of touching it, because that old man has never once trusted a thing he didn't understand, and it saved his family's lives. Because that beetle was the gold-devouring jade beetle, the vanguard of the swarm. A third of the entire Zerg army is just these things, metal eaters that breed faster than anything alive, that don't invade so much as incubate, laying eggs in a host and whispering at it to eat more and more, until the young burst out grown. The winter wasn't the swarm's opening move, this was. While everyone shivered and waited for 4 months to pass, the Zerg had already quietly seeded my coastline through every fish my people ate. So I locked down the beaches, captured the beetle alive in a lightning cage, and pulled in every family that had eaten seafood. Adults, it turned out, were nearly immune. The dragon was busy turning their bodies into something the eggs couldn't stomach, quietly unlocking their gene locks for free. But children who need everything to grow, took the eggs 80 times out of 100. 7 kids came back carrying a clutch each, a month from hatching. And I had to walk into a room, sit their parents down under photographs of their sons and daughters, and explain that I could most likely save them, force the eggs out by unlocking the children early, or burn them out with a controlled current. But that most likely is not certainly, and would they sign the form? There's no laser for this one. No mech, no dragon, no butler in the walls. Just a father telling other parents the odds on their kids, in the middle of the coldest winter the world had ever seen. Some fights you don't get to win with a punchline, but I won that one. The surgery's held. I put the word on the forum, no seafood for children, and any kid with the symptoms comes to me free, 1 parent to a bed, and the whole province brought me their sons and daughters, and we cleaned the eggs out of every one we could reach. And that's exactly when the enemy showed me they'd been playing a longer game than a beetle in a fish. Because a man walked up to my gate force-feeding a kidnapped child a piece of infected fish, trying to counterfeit his way into the free room and board. And when my guard scanned the kid and the kid said, "He's not my father," we'd caught a human trafficker using my kindness as cover. Then Alfred found the real horror underneath it. Nearly 100 of the orphans arriving at my gate had nanobombs planted in their little bodies, walking detonators smuggled in to go off inside my walls on a chosen day. God's descent had turned children into delivery systems. I could have just triggered them all remotely and been safe in a second. I didn't. I quarantined every one, quietly, and put my entire medical corps on surgery after surgery to cut the bombs out without cutting the kids' futures out with them. Hardest on the ones from outside my province. The ones the dragon hadn't yet strengthened, whose bodies had nothing to spare. Hundreds of them. I closed most of my hospital to do it. And I did it because the day I start detonating children to keep myself safe is the day there's no difference left between me and the thing that put the bombs there. And I could feel the whole trap tightening at once. 3 gods in 3 neighboring provinces had drawn up the plan against Clara, and it was elegant, I'll give them that. Spread a rumor that M province is fat with food, and let the starving hordes of the frozen cities throw themselves at my walls for free. No gods spent. Wake their 2 4th-tier lord zombies and send a corpse tide behind the human one. Detonate the smuggled children mid-assault. And, worst of all, seed a rumor inside my own shelter, that Kindling does inhuman experiments, that the missing orphans are being harvested, so my own frightened people would riot from within while the enemy walked in through the smoke and grabbed my daughter. 30 planted agitators, all from outside the province, all quietly coordinating, had the internal uprising scheduled for the day after tomorrow. The Zerg's beetles, 3 gods' armies, a manufactured famine, a manufactured panic, and a bomb in every orphan, all timed to land on one little girl at once. So I turned to the little girl herself, and she solved the smallest piece of it before dinner, because Clara, it turns out, gives the dragon's breath, and Clara can take it back. She summoned a palm-sized dragon of pale gold light, reached across the whole shelter, and quietly pulled the dragon chi back out of my 30 traitors, cut them off from it forever, turned them from gene-lock threats back into ordinary frightened men I could handle with one squad. My values got rearranged again, watching my daughter drain a superpower out of 30 people from across a building while asking me to peel her a shrimp. But here's the part that actually mattered, the part I almost missed while I was busy running a province. Clara had been stalling me on purpose, dragging her feet, playing the brat, inventing reasons for me to hold her, because she's an orphan who watched her mother marry the busy man of the house and quietly decided she was in the way. She just wanted her father to look at her, and I'd been coaxing her like a chore between crises instead of knowing her like a daughter. So I stopped. I picked her up, told her I'd been wrong, and promised her the one thing a high-city kid who grew up too poor to travel had always wanted and never said out loud. When this is over, you and me, we go outside and build a snowman. Pinky swear. Her whole face changed, and standing there with a promise on my little finger, I caught myself imagining the child Han Yue and I might have someday, and understood exactly what I was really defending. Not a province, not a shelter, a dinner table with a kid at the head of it, bossing me around about crab meat and vinegar. Which is precisely why I was going to burn down anyone who reached for it, and out past the walls, in a 40-below blizzard. The reaching had already begun. God's Descent's assassins were testing my newest vassals, the Shan City clan, with a girl playing helpless in the snow. The old veterans of that clan had buried their own countrymen for decades. They saw the trap for exactly what it was, and lit a signal firework into the storm, the character for their city burning against the dark, because the war for Clara was starting on every front at once, and everybody's line was about to be tested at the same hour. The Shan City veterans passed. They saw through the girl in the snow, dug heavy guns out of the drifts, kindling weapons that fire clean at 40 below, and ended the ninja infiltration, then lit their firework and waited for the real wave, because that had only been the appetizer. All along my borders, small suicide squads came first, gene-locked fanatics who traded their own lives one for one just to keep my guard busy. Then the real number arrived. 3 million. 1.5 million zombies driven by the gods' lord corpses, 600,000 gods' descent troops, and 800,000 starving people from the frozen cities, lured in by a rumor that M province was fat with food. 3 million, against my tens of thousands. The gods didn't want to fight me. They wanted to bury me under bodies they hadn't paid for, so I met bodies with bodies. Han Yue raised 1 million of the dead across 3 cities and threw them into the line. My guard, my AIs, and Liu Xiaoyu and Xiaoxi's 12-meter mechs plugged the gaps. And every time the blue light of a kindling weapon lit up a border, the whole province took heart. Because in M province, everyone knew what that light meant. We held 3 million with 2. But Alfred ran the math and told me the truth I already knew. Hold long enough and attrition wins for the side with the bigger pile. That was the whole point. Keep my army pinned at the edges so the gods could walk into High City through the middle and take my daughter in the confusion. And they had a knife at my back the whole time. On Dragon Island, an old Shanghai official named Liu Wen, he's oldest friend, and the Yuan family's man, flew in with a bottle of wine and a nuclear weapon, 10 times the yield of the one the island nation once used. The Yuan matriarch's terms, delivered through a friendship, release Guan Yuan, or Liu drops the bomb on High City, and the Yuan take my whole shelter into the grave with their grandson. Old He refused to beg for them and got backed into a corner. He called me, shaking, to ask me to just let the man go. But Alfred had already lifted every word off the cameras on that island. I'd hidden a clone there to guard Old He, so when I picked up, I greeted Liu by name before he'd said a word. I told him to drop the bomb if he had the nerve, because I don't negotiate with people who point nukes at children, and if the Yuan wanted to spend a nuclear weapon to free one man who can't die, they could spend the rest of their house paying me back for it. Old He put his old friend under house arrest to stop the launch, and old Liu, cornered and disarmed, quietly smiled, which told me the nuke had never been the real threat. It was a test. Everyone was testing me at once. Then the gods played their trump, and it was the sweetest thing I'd heard in months. They gave the order to detonate the bombs inside the smuggled children, the internal chaos that was supposed to blow my doors open from within, and nothing happened. Nothing. Because I'd spent that whole hard week cutting every one of those bombs out of every one of those kids. Their god AI reported the failure, and then, in front of all three deities, it added the detail that finished them. It couldn't cut my voice out of their own command channel, because my butler's priority was higher than theirs. Alfred hadn't just fought their headquarters' divine messenger. He'd walked into it and sat down at the head of the table. Three gods sat in a room watching their master's own machine take orders from mine, and understood they'd brought a knife to a war they didn't know the shape of, so they stopped pretending they wanted M Province, and named what they'd wanted all along. A deity called Victor, with two more beside him, opened a channel and offered me a trade. Hand over the Dragon Maiden, and they leave. Refuse, and they seed a new Doomsday virus into the clouds and let it rain down over the whole province. A plague that turns you the instant it touches skin, dead then monstrous, until a whole province is a ghost town. One girl, they said, for everyone. A generous deal, the way they told it. And that was the moment I finally understood the whole war. It had never been about the province, or the shelter, or me. 6 months of gods and zombies and ancient families and a frozen sky, all of it, was a 100-armed machine reaching for one little orphan who just wanted her father to build her a snowman. They offered me her life for a province. I laughed, and I told the god that he had no idea why I wasn't going to regret a single thing, because Victor had done his homework, and his homework was already out of date. He'd counted my guard, my personal guards, my 3 suits of armor, my 2 mechs, all of it pinned at the borders, and concluded my house was empty and I was bluffing, so I told him to look to his left, and a mountain split open, and the classic of mountains and seas rose out of it. Not a weapon, a factory. Its gate opened, 200 little cubes floated out, and each one unfolded into a full suit of nano armor until the sky over his Elite 500 was a wall of copies. 3 gods sat in a car and watched me manufacture an army in the time it took them to gasp. His missiles couldn't scratch it. His virus rain never fell, because I'd already flown up and taken control of the helicopters carrying it. A stealth jet is invisible to radar, but its hot engine is a bonfire to a thermal eye. And when I fitted every one of my exhausted guard with an exoskeleton off the same factory and doubled their strength mid-battle, the 3 million-man siege simply came apart. The starving hordes who'd come for free food took one look at my people punching through second-tier fighters and ran home, and I let them, because I don't need to kill a hungry man who's decided to leave. I ended the whole war with a machine that builds more machines, set to the loudest song in my library, and hung 3 silver name tags in my basement next to a god who was still eating fried chicken. But the knife at my back went off anyway. Old Liu hadn't brought one nuke. He'd brought a small one on every jet ringing my province, and a big one over High City, all of them already counting down, because the UN would rather glass the whole province than lose face. Alfred found them the same way he found the virus jets. The pincer formation gave them away, and I sent my armors to stop every launch at once. Most I caught, but one crew on a helicopter over the sea got their big one into the air and then, cornered, blew their own grenade to set it off early, laughing about taking me with them. And here's the single most insane thing my butler did in 6 months of insane things. A live nuclear warhead detonated in that cabin, and Alfred wrapped it in a shell of nanoparticles a fraction of a second before it bloomed, and held the explosion inside a 10-meter bubble by main force. The blast that should have erased the province spread to 1 meter, 3, 10, and slammed against a skin of liquid metal that was melting away by the second. He had 30 seconds before it burned through. So he called in 3 more classic of mountains and seas platforms, fed the shell more metal, and then he carried it. A going-off nuclear bomb, held in a machine's cupped hands, straight up out of the atmosphere and into orbit, let go, and ran. It went off in the black where no one could hear it, and no one could be hurt. A soundless flower over a blue planet, while my AIs raced home ahead of the shockwave. A father in a command room, watching his butler haul the apocalypse itself off the board and drop it in space. I've stopped being surprised that I built him. I've never stopped being grateful. So the war ended with the province intact, 3 gods and 2 more in my cells, and a very clear message for whoever had handed a coward 6 nuclear weapons. I kept 5 of them, and I intend to return them one at a time. And old Lou, who'd sworn he only had the one, who let old he lock him up thinking he'd stop the launch, sat in a cell on Dragon Island, and smiled, and finally told my oldest friend the truth. The bombs went up anyway, and there was nothing old he could have done. What old Lou didn't know, savoring the look on old he's face, was that his masterstroke had already been carried off into space and diffused before he opened his mouth. His whole play was a corpse he was still talking to. And through all of it, old he kept circling one thought, and it's the thought I want you to sit with too. He knew me. He knew that in the apocalypse there's no law left, that I repay every wrong in full, that a man with my technology who wanted to could simply crown himself. He knew that if I'd ever decided to walk over to God's descent, I wouldn't have started as a soldier. I'd have started as a god, and I chose, every single day, not to. I chose the province, and the coats in the snow, and the kids with the bombs cut out of them, and a dinner table with an orphan at the head of it. That's the part the gods never understood about the man they came to rob. They thought I was defending a fortress. I was defending a reason to stay human. Which is exactly why, with the last enemy off the board and the winter finally starting to lift, I did the least strategic and most important thing I'd done all year. I threw a wedding. But first I tied off the board. Old Lou, the man with the nukes, got his leg taken off by a laser when he strutted up to my armor to threaten it, and got carried home in a cage to a cell of his own. And nobody came for him. Shanghai's general raged, and then went quiet the second he learned my foster mother was Xuan Yuan. The Yuan family, who'd sent the nukes, discovered their golden grandson was mine, and their nuke man was mine, and decided the smartest move was to pretend I didn't exist. I'd become the thing the ancient houses tell each other to walk around. And down in my cells, 5 of the most feared beings on the planet, 3 captured gods, a mole, and a deposed deity, sat in a row while Stone, the god who defected for fried chicken, ate a slow 3-course dinner 3 feet from their bars, on purpose, at full volume, narrating every bite, because I'd told him he could have the feast if he made it loud. A war god reduced to weeping at a chicken leg he wasn't allowed to touch. That's what the fearsome look like once you take the fear away. And still, none of it was the real war. Because out under the frozen sea, the actual apocalypse was just clearing its throat. My scavengers flew over whales the size of buildings picked down to bone, and one of them nearly got a supply chopper swallowed by a 100-meter thing that leapt 300 meters out of the ice to reach it. Alfred pulled them 1,000 meters up with half a second to spare. Down deeper than any of my sensors could reach, the beasts were gathering around a small, thin, blue-skinned figure barely 3 meters tall, a Zerg queen with a near-human face, and every leviathan in that black water bowed its head to her while she poured blue light into them and made them stronger. The zombies were the breather, the cold was the softening up. The sea full of gods that eat whales, answering to a little blue queen. That was the war, and it was 1 month out. So I ran my factories day and night, building the 10 great beasts of the classic of mountains and seas, and a barrier to wall off the whole province, because when that tide came ashore, coats and lasers weren't going to be enough. 1 month. 1 month of borrowed quiet between the winter that was ending and the swarm that was coming. And I looked at that calendar, at the exact width of the calm, and I made a decision that no strategist would sign off on. I wasn't going to spend that month only building weapons. I'd spent 6 months being a warlord, a landlord, a butcher, a savior, a piece on other men's boards. For one afternoon of the 1 month I had left, I was going to be a husband, and a father, and just a man who kept a promise to a little girl about a snowman. 'Cause if I couldn't stop long enough to do that, then there was nothing under all the armor worth defending in the first place. So I planned the wedding. But the sea gave me exactly 1 more fire to put out before I could put on the suit. Because the little blue queen at the bottom of the ocean pointed 1 hand at Shanghai, and 8 of her 100-meter beasts stood up out of the ice and started walking toward the coast. And Shanghai wasn't mine. It belonged to a general named Jin Tao, old he's estranged brother, who'd believed the warnings, dug in his whole army, and now watched his heaviest weapons, nukes included, do nothing but annoy monsters that healed their own wounds with a blue glow. Every gun in the city, and the beasts didn't slow down. And the UN family, who'd been squatting in Shanghai lording it over everyone, did what the UN do. Their spoiled young master had gone joyriding over the sea in a helicopter that very morning and gotten swallowed whole, karma with teeth. And the moment the beasts came ashore, the family patriarch abandoned his post, abandoned the city, and ran inland, leaving General Xiao's back wide open so God's descent could pour in behind the kaiju and finish the job. A god named Oscar sat back to watch 2 disasters crush a city at once, and phoned the general just to gloat that he'd wait until Xiao beat the beasts before wiping out his survivors, as a courtesy. What broke that siege, before I ever arrived, was a dozen young pilots, kids in their early 20s, out of ammunition, who flew their empty jets straight into the God's Descent fighters ringing the last defense line and took them down by ramming them. One of them left a last message for his captain. "Sorry we can't make your wedding and stand as your best men. Tell my girlfriend to forget me, and if she can't, I'll be her son next life and love her all over again." Then the recording ended in an explosion. A dozen of them, gone, to buy a city 10 more minutes. I've fought gods and dragons and a nuke, and that voicemail is the bravest thing in this entire story, and none of it was mine. The 10 minutes were enough, because I was already coming. Old he swallowed his pride and called me, and I'll be honest, I didn't go only to be a hero. I went because 8 dead 100-meter kaiju are 8 priceless specimens, and I wasn't about to let God's Descent have them. But I went. My guard flew ahead to handle the zombies breaking loose in the broken city, and behind them rose the thing I'd been building for exactly this. The 10 great beasts of the classic of mountains and seas, a 150-meter war mech, and then 3 more beside it. And here's the part that rearranged Lu Xiaoyu and Xiaoxi's understanding of the world when they saw it. The other 3 weren't crewed by people. They were crewed by my wife. Han Yue's 5th-tier zombies, 4 to a mech, piloting a 150-meter god beast because their strength was high enough and her control was total. My zombie queen was going to fight kaiju by remote, through the dead, from a command chair while eating chips. And in the arsenal, I uncovered the one weapon I'd hidden from myself, a city buster. A laser the width of a house that doesn't run on zombie crystals but on insect cores, 3,000 of them a shot, and I had barely enough hoarded for 3. It's the gun that levels a high city in one pull. I fed it its cores, set it to wait for my word, put on my own suit, and told Jin Tao to hold 10 more minutes. Then 4 flying men and a fleet of god beasts crossed the speed of sound toward a burning city, to kill 8 leviathans and settle a very old debt with a family that had just run away from its own people. The mechs hit the coast first, 150 meters of alloy each, dropping out of the sky onto ice, blades already lit, and the kaiju turned to meet them, all 8, each one taller than the towers behind it. It was not a clean fight. My god beasts cut, and the wounds sealed over in blue light. They cut deeper, and the beasts healed deeper. Lu Xiaoyu and Xiaoxi drove theirs like people possessed. Han Yue's 3, crewed by her dead, moved like a single mind, because they were one. She sat in a command chair, 1,000 miles away, and fought kaiju through corpses, and it cost her. I watched her face go gray on the monitor. 1,000,000 zombies is a slow afternoon. 3 god beasts and 8 leviathans at once is a knife held to your own throat. They wore me down toward the one option I hate. The beasts didn't tire. The blue light didn't run out. Every minute the ice cracked wider and another maw came up out of the deep to reinforce them, and somewhere below all of it, I knew, a small blue queen was feeding them strength like a mother spooning soup. My blades couldn't outpace her healing. My missiles were snacks. Shanghai was one broken line from gone. God's Descent was circling the wreckage waiting to feed, and I had a wife going pale in a chair holding a line she couldn't hold much longer. So I made the call I'd been dreading since I built the thing. I put out the fire. The city buster vaporized the sea itself, turned 100 kilometers of frozen ocean into one clean, empty crater, and every Zerg thing in it into nothing. And Alfred's new barrier caught the tsunami it kicked back at Shanghai. 8 leviathans, gone. General Shao's city stood. I hauled the carcasses home from my labs and flew back to my wife, because that's who I am now, a man who fights kaiju in the morning and hurries home in the afternoon because his wife caught a cold. And that's when Clara, mid-scolding me for taking Han Yue on a mission, let it slip. "You knew Han Yue's mother was pregnant and you still sent her out there?" I stopped hearing everything else in the room. Pregnant. Han Yue touched her stomach, went pink, and said it out loud. "You're going to be a father, a real one." And the boy who started this whole story getting thrown out of a rented room with 2,000 yuan and a death sentence certificate stood in a city-sized fortress under a dragon and completely, gracelessly lost his mind. I built her nano steps to climb into bed. I made Alfred narrate folic acid to me. I became insufferable. I'd never had a thing that was mine that nobody could take. Now I had 2, and a 3rd coming, so I paid the debt I owed the smallest one. I took Clara and Han Yue out into the snow, and my daughter, a high-city kid too poor her whole life to ever see snow, built 4 snowmen, me, Han Yue, herself, and her unborn stinky little brother. We had a snowball fight I cheated at by turning Alfred against her. She bit my shoulder. She called me a cheater. She was right. Han Yue sat in a nano chair, with her hand on her belly, and watched her broken little family play in the snow like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, which for us made it a miracle. Think about the math of it. A kid too poor to ever see snow, a woman who died and came back for that kid, a man thrown out with 2,000 yuan, and all 3 of us somehow, in the snow, laughing. a snowman. I promised her a snowman, and in the middle of the end of the world, I kept it. It's the best thing I did all year, and it didn't require a single weapon. And then the sky over us tore open, and a 50-meter God's Descent war machine came down and beat me half to death in front of them. It ran my armor to shreds. It put a 10-meter steel needle straight through my chest. I hit the snow in a spreading pool of my own blood, needle pinning me upright, and I coughed out my last words, while my wife and my daughter screamed and clawed at me, and Clara sobbed that it was all her fault for wanting to play. The monster gloated that it had blocked Alfred, that no rescue was coming, that the great Kindling Shelter died in the snow on his own doorstep. Han Yue begged me to hold on. I told her not to cry. She wasn't pretty when she cried. And then I asked her for one last thing, a dying man's final request. And my voice, weak and fading, went suddenly firm and clear. And a ring bloomed on my hand, and I stood up in a clean suit without a scratch on me, and dropped to one knee. Han Yue, marry me. The whole thing was staged, every drop of it. The monster was Alfred wearing a costume, the needle, the blood, the death, a set, and I'd walked my own wife through her worst nightmare on purpose, so that this exact second would land like a truck. The 50-meter war machine reshaped its black and red armor into 3 golden characters, marry him, and everyone I loved dropped their optical camouflage and appeared out of thin air screaming yes, yes, say yes. Clara loudest of all, her tear-streaked face gone rosy and delighted in the same breath. Han Yue, my zombie queen, 6th-tier lord of a million corpses, figured out in one heartbeat that she'd been played from the moment we stepped outside, and burst into tears, and called me every name she had, and hugged me hard enough to crack a rib, and nodded, and nodded, and nodded. A ring went on her finger. I'd proposed to the ex-lord zombie I once made a trade with by faking my own murder, and she said yes with her face buried in my chest. Best plan I ever ran, and I've run some plans. Was it cruel? A little. I put the woman carrying my child through 5 minutes of her worst nightmare, but here's why I did it that way, and not with flowers. The first time Han Yue and I met, it wasn't love. It was a deal. A trade to bring her daughter back. 2 lonely people using each other to survive. I couldn't propose to her like it started with roses, because it didn't. So I proposed to her the way we actually began. In the middle of a fake catastrophe, with the world ending, with everything on the line. That's our language. She didn't want a fairy tale. She'd have seen through a fairy tale in a second. She wanted the truth, dressed up as a disaster, with a ring at the bottom of it. And she got it. Then I did the thing that actually mattered. I opened the wedding to everyone. Every couple in my shelter who'd found each other in the dark and never gotten to marry because the world had ended. Come get married with me, on me, everything provided. 20 couples said yes. 21 weddings at once, unheard of even before the apocalypse. And on the day, in the same valley where I'd built the very first Kindling Shelter out of nothing, 21 brides came in on 21 armed helicopters, teleported out a kilometer, and roaring back in a procession of gunships, and stepped down in red and gold onto 21 red carpets, while the whole province watched on the live stream. Wu Jie officiated. Old He and Mother Fang stood as my elders. The man who paid my way through school. The woman who raised me in a burned orphanage. Both of them at my wedding at the end of the world. The whole valley went red. Lanterns strung the walls. Candles every 5 meters down. Carpets over 100 meters long. 21 couples walked them hand in hand while a province watched. Every 10 meters they stopped and bowed. To heaven, to earth, to their ancestors, to the local gods. They stepped over a fire pit for luck. They reached their elders, and they bowed to each other, and they served the tea. And just like that, in the worst winter the world had ever seen, 21 families began. Then the doors opened, and the banquet swallowed everyone whole. We ate from noon to night. I toasted strangers until I couldn't feel my face. Somewhere in there, a man who'd started the year sleeping in a rented room realized he had a wife, and a daughter, and a table, and a whole city singing at his door. And I want you to hold the whole shape of it in your head for 1 second. This story opened with a nobody getting 2,000 yuan thrown at his feet and told to be gone by sunrise. It ends with that same nobody marrying a queen in a gunship procession under a living dragon, with a princess and a war hero for family and a child on the way. That's the distance. That's the whole distance, start to finish. And I walked every inch of it since the night I clicked continue. And I didn't stop at 21. 2 days after the wedding, I threw the whole base a matchmaking festival. Free food, free rooms, a simple system Alfred ran. If 2 people liked each other, they traded their info cards, and the rest was up to them. Because here's what 6 months had taught me. You don't hold a place together with walls and lasers. You hold it together with reasons for people to want tomorrow. And they came. Joe Da came, the scavenger his family threw away, now a guard captain, dragged in by a girl 10 years younger, who'd carried his face in her heart since the day she watched his stubborn back walk into a fight. He kept telling her he wasn't worth it. She kept not listening. Her whole family showed up to tell him to hurry up and marry the girl already. Some couples found each other over snacks and shy small talk. Some didn't, and left as friends. It wasn't fairy tale love. Most of it was two frightened people, deciding the walk is shorter with a hand to hold. That's fine. That's most love, in any world. And for one weekend my fortress full of soldiers and orphans stopped being a war machine and turned into what I'd actually been building the whole time. A town. A place people got married in. That night belonged to me and Han Yue, and I'll leave the door closed on it. Some things you keep for yourself, and a married man's earned that much. In the morning she was still sitting there with a hand on her belly, talking about the future like a place she finally believed she'd live to see. And I let myself, for one single morning, believe it too. I shouldn't have, because while I was exchanging rings, the next war was already shaking hands 600 miles out to sea. The blue thing I'd vaporized in Shanghai hadn't died. Gao Feng, a prince of the spirit race, of a whole other world called the Kunshu realm that's been pouring down through the meteorite's rift, disguised as my Zerg, survived the city buster because his two beasts burned themselves alive to shield him and washed up in the sea to be fished out by a god named Helios. And the two of them, the alien prince and the god's descent deity, sat down over tea and agreed to destroy me together when the spirit army comes through the rift in a week. But Gao Feng set one condition, and it's the one that turns this from a war into something personal. He doesn't want my province. He doesn't want my shelter. He named a single person he's coming to collect and forbade anyone to touch, Han Yue, my wife. He watched her command the sea's monsters and decided she belongs to him. So the being I have to beat next isn't after my crown. He's after the woman I just married and the child she's carrying, by name. And the 5 gods in my basement told me how much bigger it all gets. Hunger loosens even a god's tongue. Between bites they sold me the truth. God's Descent's real headquarters isn't in Asia. It's in Antarctica, at the bottom of a world nobody's watching. They answer to 5 divine kings and 100 full deities, with divine children and messengers past counting. They're behind nearly every disaster on the planet, and half the countries it happens to never even know. Which means the war I just won, the gods, the province, the whole 6 months, was one branch office. One. I broke a finger, and there's a whole body it belongs to, and it has just now noticed the finger's gone. And they didn't even wait for the army. The last thing that happened is a video, and the whole province is chewing on it right now. A staged, edited lie. A suicide agent let my guard kill him, and then his people posted a butchered cut accusing my personal guards of the most monstrous crimes against his family. 3 seconds of real footage. A mountain of fabricated screaming, built to poison my own people against me from the inside, and behind it, the real knife. Men wearing Kindling Shelter uniforms, my colors, my armor, marched on a small shelter under my protection, and opened fire. So the whole province watches Kindling Shelter turn on its own, and never knows it was imposters. The last image of my winter is a shelter burning in my name, lit by men who aren't mine, while the video of my innocence spreads slower than the lie. So no, the apocalypse isn't over. It was never going to be over. I started as a bullied kid who pressed continue at 2 in the morning and woke up the landlord of the end of the world. I clawed through zombies, through gods, through a frozen sky, a nuke, an ocean full of leviathans, all the way to a snowman and a wedding and a baby. And the very second I had something worth losing, the universe lined up an alien prince, a death cult, and a lie in my own face to come take it. Ask me if I'd click continue again, knowing all of it, knowing the cold, knowing the gods, knowing the monster in the sea that wants my wife's name. I'd click it before you finish the question. Because the game handed me a dinner table with a queen and a dragon daughter and an empty chair waiting for a kid. And there is nothing in this universe or the next one I won't burn down to keep that table set. Let the spirit army come. I've got a family now. And I have never once lost when I was defending my home.